Chapter 602. As soon as he entered this strange space, Qin Wushuang immediately felt a wave of powerful pressure. This pressure was very strange and was completely different from the pure water pressure from before. Of course, Yin Zhuiyang also felt this strange pressure. However, at this moment, he couldn't care less. Like a headless fly, when he saw a path in front of him, he ran forward in a panic. He only had one thought, which was to avoid Qin Wushuang's pursuit. The moment Yin Zhuiyang saw Qin Wushuang use the Supreme Dao Shield, he already knew that something was wrong. Qin Wushuang had obtained Lei Jiao's Supreme Dao weapon. With this Supreme Dao weapon, Qin Wushuang would be very confident in attacking and defending. However, his Supreme Dao weapon would lose all its advantages in front of the Supreme Dao Shield. At this moment, Qin Wushuang not only possessed the Supreme Dao Shield, but also his famous Supreme Dao Bao and Arrow. Yin Zhuiyang had heard too much about the power of the Bao and Arrow. Fortunately, after entering this unknown space, the entire environment had clearly changed. This space seemed to have walked out of the underwater world. The surrounding environment was like that of land. There were no waves or water currents. Although the strange pressure was constantly present, there was no doubt that this space was definitely not an underwater space. Not to mention Yin Zhuiyang. Even Qin Wushuang was puzzled. They were clearly chasing after Yin Zhuiyang in the 500 feet deep water. How did they suddenly enter such a strange place? This space actually had flowers, trees, and green mountains. Obviously, this was a hidden paradise at the bottom of the water. It gave off a very strange feeling. What is this place? Could it be that we have already walked out of the Black Dead Sea? Qin Wushuang was absolutely incredulous. Or did we suddenly enter a space independent of the Black Dead Sea? Qin Wushuang's mind was filled with doubts. However, he didn't have the time to think too much about it. At this moment, his only goal was to kill Yin Zhuiyang. Only by killing Yin Zhuiyang would he have the time to think about other problems. However, this space was obviously much more complicated than the simple underwater world. The endless mountain ranges, valleys, forests, and grasslands made it much easier for Yin Zhuiyang to escape. Qin Wushuang chased for a while and saw a large forest in front of him. It was dark and full of evil. As the saying goes, don't enter a forest. Qin Wushuang stopped chasing. He took out the observant finger jade disc and activated it. He had already locked onto Yin Zhuiyang's position. Seeing that the observant finger jade disc was working normally, Qin Wushuang was no longer in a hurry. Rather than blindly chasing after Yin Zhuiyang, it was better to let Yin Zhuiyang be complacent and let him think that he had shaken off Qin Wushuang's pursuit to numb him. Then, he would think of a way to sneak up on Yin Zhuiyang and launch a surprise attack to take him down. Qin Wushuang knew that it would take some effort to prove that he could defeat Yin Zhuiyang. Most importantly, Qin Wushuang realized that this strange space was filled with the mysteries of an unknown world. Qin Wushuang faintly felt that this place was definitely not an ordinary place. Qin Wushuang unfolded the purple cloud yin-yang wings and flew towards the top of the forest. Fortunately, this place did not have a very powerful flying restriction spell. Qin Wushuang's purple cloud yin-yang wings had started to grow when he was at the refined Void Martial stage. Now that he was at the profound Void Martial stage, he had unknowingly evolved twice. These two evolutions had given the purple cloud yin-yang wings a little more confidence in resisting flying restriction spells. Therefore, when Qin Wushuang unfolded the purple cloud yin-yang wings to fly, it was a completely different concept from relying on ordinary flying techniques. With the observant finger jade disc, Qin Wushuang was able to track Yin Zhuiyang effortlessly. After observing for a moment, he realized that he had been worrying too much. At this moment, Yin Zhuiyang was no longer in the mood to ambush him in the forest. Instead, he was fleeing forward in a panic. In a short while, he was out of the forest. Qin Wushuang maintained his speed and chased after Yin Zhuiyang. He transmitted his voice, Yin Zhuiyang, no matter where you hide, you will not be able to escape today's calamity. When Yin Zhuiyang heard Qin Wushuang's voice, he was frightened out of his wits. He had thought that he had already gotten rid of Qin Wushuang's tracking. Even if he had not completely gotten rid of Qin Wushuang's tracking, he had at least temporarily resolved the crisis. He did not expect that Qin Wushuang had not gotten rid of him at all and was still following him closely. At this moment, Yin Zhuiyang finally experienced the feeling of despair. Even after entering this strange space, he still could not get rid of Qin Wushuang. He really could not think of any other way. At this moment, Yin Zhuiyang's eyes suddenly lit up. This was because he saw a ray of blue light shooting towards the sky from behind a mountain range. It was like a flame. This blue light was very demonic and was much taller than a mountain range. At this moment, how could Yin Zhuiyang still have the time to consider if there was any danger? Seeing such a strange place, he could not wait for some demons and ghosts to come out. At least, they could disturb the situation. Even if he had to die, he could not die in the hands of Qin Wushuang. He could only drag Qin Wushuang down with him. He recklessly rushed towards the place where the blue light had shot out from. Qin Wushuang had obviously also seen this strange scene. The indistinct feeling of oppression in his heart became even stronger. He flapped the purple cloud yin-yang wings and chased after Yin Zhuiyang recklessly. He had already started to raise the graceful spiritual bow. The only advantage of this space was that there was no water pressure to interfere. When Qin Wushuang used the graceful spiritual bow, he did not have to consider the problem of aiming underwater. Yin Zhuiyang had always been known for his speed. At this moment, when he was fleeing for his life, his speed was not slow at all. Although Qin Wushuang had activated the purple cloud yin-yang wings with all his strength, he could only close the distance a little. However, this little distance was not enough for him to kill Yin Zhuiyang with 100% certainty. After all, Yin Zhuiyang had a supreme Tao weapon in his hands. With such a weapon, it meant that he had the ability to block the graceful spiritual bow. Although the graceful spiritual bow was powerful, it was also a supreme Tao weapon. Yin Zhuiyang still had the chance to block it. However, the graceful spiritual bow was not like other supreme Tao weapons that could be used without limit. 3 arrows. There was only a chance for 3 arrows. If he missed, Qin Wushuang would have to recall the dark green arrow before he could shoot again. It was not that Qin Wushuang did not have a better way. For example, he could use another supreme Tao 5 elemental talisman. However, Qin Wushuang knew that the supreme Tao 5 elemental talisman was his most powerful life-saving talisman. Unless he encountered a supreme Tao elite warrior, he really did not want to waste it. The power unleashed by the combination of the supreme Tao 5 elemental talisman and the graceful spiritual bow was definitely at the supreme Tao level. It was a treasure that could unleash the power of a supreme Tao weapon to the extreme. He did not want to waste it when dealing with Yin Zhuiyang. In the blink of an eye, the blue light was already in front of his eyes. Yin Zhuiyang flipped over the high slope and looked towards the blue light. The place that the blue light enveloped was actually a magnificent building. The building was magnificent and emitted an extremely powerful aura of a king. Around the building, there was a building that looked like a wall, but also did not look like a wall. Looking from afar, it looked like a huge dragon was entrenched there. The head of the huge dragon was just right above the main building, giving off a feeling that it was roaring to the blue dome of heaven. Qin Wushuang was flying at a high altitude, so he could see the cave even more clearly, especially the huge dragon that looked like a sculpture. The entire building was entrenched under its body, and its aura was even more magnificent. Although Yin Zhuiyang was shocked, he did not hesitate at all as he pounced towards the blue light. At this moment, he only cared about escaping and did not consider what was underneath. Qin Wushuang looked at the main building below the huge dragon's head. There were clearly huge golden words that were engraved with seal script. The words Coiling Dragon Palace Hall were written. Coiling Dragon Palace Hall? Qin Wushuang was shocked. Could it be? He suddenly remembered the mission of this trip, which was to find the bloodline of the immemorial demon dragon. Could it be that this Coiling Dragon Palace Hall was the lair of the immemorial demon dragon in the Black Dead Sea? Qin Wushuang's consciousness was very sensitive, so he immediately paid attention to it. It was no wonder that when he entered this space, he felt that this space was filled with a strange atmosphere. This atmosphere was very oppressive, and it was filled with a mysterious and ancient aura. Behind this mysterious aura, there was a fear of the unknown. Qin Wushuang realized that even if this coiling dragon palace hall was not the lair of the immemorial demon dragon, it was definitely related to the immemorial demon dragon. What he thought here, how could Qin Wushuang hesitate? He bent down and rushed downwards. Yin Jueyang could already feel the footsteps of Qin Wushuang chasing after him. Without thinking about his own safety, he leaped towards the depths of the blue light. He only had one thought now, which was to escape into the building. Even if he could not evade Qin Wushuang, it would be good if he could alleviate the situation temporarily. Yin Jueyang also knew that most likely, this building was the territory of the immemorial demon dragon. Therefore, Yin Jiang felt lucky and hoped that he could profit from this disaster and acquire the bloodline of the immemorial demon dragon. If he could truly acquire the bloodline of the immemorial demon dragon, it would not be difficult to turn misfortune into fortune. For your information, the immemorial demon dragon was certainly a beast of the supreme Tao. The dragon clan was also the king among the beast clans. The value of the bloodline was comparable to the totem powerhouse like the Xian Yuan clan. In fact, the dragon clan was the totem clan of the endless eastern sea. Only, the dragon clan at the Xian Yuan mound was usually a branch of the dragon clan. Their bloodline was not as pure as the totem dragon clan at the endless eastern sea. However, at the moment, how could Yin Jueyang be qualified to be picky? He only thought that if he could get the baptism of the bloodline of the immemorial demon dragon, it would certainly allow his strength to increase greatly in a short time. Everyone knew about the hidden treasures of the dragon clan. If he could inherit one or two of the most precious treasures of the dragon clan, it would be a piece of cake to turn defeat into victory and kill Qin Wushuang. When he thought here, Yin Jueyang was even more motivated. He passed through that blue light and arrived before the building. Before that building, there were 9 giant pillars that were placed across the square. Those pillars had a peculiar shape. On top of each pillar, there was a spiritual beast that looked like a dragon. The distribution of these 9 pillars was also extremely unique. As soon as Qin Wushuang saw them from afar, he knew that these 9 pillars contained some profound principles. Yin Jueyang was in a panic and did not choose his path. He did not think much and scuttled indirectly. Qin Wushuang's heart sank as he thought inwardly, I am afraid that this Yin Jueyang is seeking his own death. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 603. The 9 pillars had a strange shape, but there was one thing that was unique. The heads of the dragon beasts that occupied the pillars were all focused towards a core area. In other words, there was a core area in the middle of the 9 pillars, like the center of a circle. As soon as Yin Jueyang rushed in, the surface of the 9 pillars immediately changed. The originally dim pillars immediately lit up with all kinds of strange lights. There were red, green, blue, purple, yellow, and white. It was as if the rainbow in the sky had been cut by someone and fell to the ground to form the 9 huge pillars. The color of the 9 pillars changed, and the dragon beasts on the pillars suddenly seemed to come alive. 9 pairs of eyes shot out rays of light at the same time, and their mouths opened wide, spitting out balls of strange light that seemed to be able to swallow the heavens and the earth. Yin Jueyang's body was swept up by the messy balls of light, and he was tossed around like a rubber ball in the midst of the light. Seeing this strange scene, Qin Wushuang stopped in his tracks and looked on in shock. Although he had expected that Yin Jueyang would be attacked by the restriction when he barged in, he did not expect it to be such a situation. Boom! Yin Jueyang's body was wrapped up by the light, and he waved the divine Tao weapon in his hand with all his might. He finally managed to obtain a sliver of space, and struggled with all his might in the reverse flow of the light. Obviously, if he was not careful, he would be completely swallowed by the reverse flow of light. Yin Jueyang let out a roar of despair and used all his strength to resist the powerful spatial turbulence. The air currents shot out by the 9 pillars were mixed together, forming a chaotic air current. It was like a pot of complicated stew, stirring in a complicated manner. Yin Jueyang was hit by the air current left and right. If not for the protection of the divine Tao weapon, he would have been turned into minced meat. Even so, Yin Jueyang felt extremely uncomfortable. Qin Wushuang, save me, save me. Yin Jueyang knew that he would not be able to hold on for long. Even with the divine Tao weapon, in the face of such an abnormal turbulence, struggling would only delay the time of being swallowed. In his despair, he almost did not care about the fact that he was being chased by Qin Wushuang. Although he had previously thought that dying in this place was better than dying at the hands of Qin Wushuang. But when the Grim Reaper really came, he still lost his composure and asked Qin Wushuang for help. Qin Wushuang watched Yin Jueyang struggle. Although he was shocked, he wasn't so enthusiastic that he would really rescue Yin Jueyang. At this moment, he was almost certain that this place was the lair of the immemorial demonic dragon. Otherwise, there would not be such a majestic place in the Black Dead Sea. Qin Wushuang looked at the aura emitted by the 9 pillars. It was filled with an ancient aura. Qin Wushuang had once felt this aura from Bao Bao. It was definitely the aura of an ancient bloodline. According to Qin Wushuang's observations, the dragons on the pillars were different in appearance, but they all had the characteristics of dragons. As the saying goes, the dragon has 9 sons, and each one is different. These 9 pillars were arranged according to the saying of the dragon having 9 sons. Qin Wushuang was shocked by what he saw. That Yin Jueyang was already on the verge of collapse from the torment of the turbulence. He urged the little spiritual qi left in his body madly and roared, "I'm going to risk it all." As soon as he finished speaking, suddenly a burst of strange red light surged from Yin Jueyang's entire body. A burst of explosive spiritual qi rushed out from his dantian and drove the supreme Tao weapon in his hand. With a full-force dash, he crashed into the nearest pillar. This Yin Jueyang had urged his dantian to the limit and did not hesitate to consume his primordial spirit to activate the supreme Tao weapon. Indeed, the effect of this dash was completely different from before. The supreme Tao long blade let out waves of mournful cries and allowed Yin Jueyang to break through a narrow space. Like a burning meteor, he slashed at that giant pillar with a long tail of air current. "Break for me!" Yin Jueyang gave a loud roar, and the supreme Tao long blade in his hand had already slashed at that pillar. Urging one's primordial spirit to the limit would cause great harm to one's dantian. It could be said that one was squandering one's life. This slash had allowed Yin Jueyang to unleash 60 to 70% of his supreme Tao power. Boom! The might of the divine blade slashed at that giant pillar, and immediately a tragic light burst out. The explosion caused by the collision tore the entire space apart. Qin Wushuang, who was hiding far behind, could also feel the trembling of the void. He could not help but flap his purple cloud yin-yang wings and slightly avoid the range of the collision to avoid being caught in the crossfire. After Yin Jueyang's slash succeeded, he took advantage of the remaining strength in his hand and slashed 3 more times. Each slash was ruthless and slashed at that pillar. After the pillar was slashed by the divine blade, the radiance on the surface of its body immediately dimmed, and it could not help but tremble. The radiance on the surface of its body also flickered and dimmed. Clearly, it was also injured by the might of the divine blade. Under Yin Jueyang's wild slashes, the pillar actually split open in the middle. Spider-like cracks spread out from the surface of the pillar. Suddenly, a loud rumble was heard, and the huge pillar collapsed with a loud bang. With this, a large gap immediately appeared in the turbulent flow of spiritual energy. Seeing hope, Yin Jueyang hurriedly rushed out in the direction of the collapsed pillar as if his life depended on it. Although there were still layers of turbulent flow fluctuations in the space formed by the turbulent flow of spiritual energy, after a large gap appeared, the restrictive force immediately decreased greatly. In addition, Yin Jueyang was right next to the gap. With his full strength, he actually managed to rush out. At this moment, Qin Wushuang also felt some admiration for Yin Jueyang's narrow escape. This Yin Jueyang was indeed a ruthless character. At the crucial moment, he was willing to risk his life. However, Qin Wushuang obviously would not allow Yin Jueyang to rush out so easily. Almost at the moment when Yin Jueyang rushed out of the circle, the graceful spiritual bow in Qin Wushuang's hand was activated once again. Whoosh! An arrow without any fancy moves, carrying Qin Wushuang's accumulated power and waiting attack. It was as if a ferocious beast that had been suppressed for thousands of years had come out of the mountains. Just as Yin Jueyang had chased away the hungry wolf at the front door, a ferocious tiger had rushed in from the back door. With a cry of Aya, he subconsciously used the divine Dao long blade in front of his chest to block it. When the divine Dao green light rushed over, it directly hit the back of the divine Dao long blade. Yin Jueyang was hit by the power of this arrow, and his body was unexpectedly pushed back unstoppably. This push did not matter. He had just struggled free from the sea of bitterness, and was pushed back into the giant whirlpool without any surprise. Yin Jueyang cursed loudly, F***CK. Before he could say the word F***CK, the whirlpool formed by the 8 pillars had already wrapped him up once again. This feeling was like a drowning person who had struggled to the shore with great difficulty. Just as he was about to climb up, he was kicked back down by someone on the shore and fell into the abyss once again. Yin Jueyang was furious. He waved the divine Dao long blade in his hand wildly to resist this wild, devouring power. Fortunately, the 9 pillars were a single entity. After he had destroyed one of them, its power had decreased by at least 20%. This gave Yin Jueyang a chance to make a final struggle. However, Yin Jueyang was very clear about his own situation. If he was allowed to enter an absolutely perfect environment and recuperate in peace, the side effects of pushing his primordial spirit to the limit could be minimized to the lowest degree. In fact, this kind of damage could even be ignored. However, all of this was simply an extravagant hope. Not to mention how powerful this whirlpool was, Qin Wushuang, who was eyeing him covetously from the outside, would definitely not let him rest. There was a saying, take his life while he was sick. This was what Yin Jueyang had done to his enemies in the past. Now, Qin Wushuang would definitely not be soft on him. Therefore, it was impossible to count on Qin Wushuang to be merciful. Countless ideas flashed through Yin Jueyang's mind, but none of them were feasible. Pushing his primordial spirit to the limit could bring him a moment of valiant fighting strength. However, this extreme pushing could only be maintained for a short period of time. In at most an hour, he would become an arrow at the end of its flight. After this hour, his entire dantian would be hollowed out, and he would become a drowning dog. Being beaten up by others was something that he could only imagine. Thinking of this, Yin Jueyang was in utter despair. He cursed loudly, Qin Wushuang, if you have the guts, come in and fight with me. What kind of ability is it to secretly shoot arrows from the outside? Qin Wushuang said leisurely, who said that I am secretly shooting arrows from the outside? I am in front of you. Firstly, I am not sneaking around. Secondly, I am not sneaking around. I'm shooting an arrow in the open. Yin Jueyang's stomach was about to explode from anger. He said furiously, if you have the guts, let me out and fight to the death with you. Don't you want to kill me? I will give you a chance. Let's see if you kill me or I kill you. Qin Wushuang said mockingly, that's right. I want to kill you. However, right now, with this restriction, all I need to do is to stay outside and prevent a drowning dog from climbing ashore. Why would I need to personally slaughter a drowning dog? Yin Jueyang was flustered and exasperated when he heard him compare himself to a drowning dog. He wished that he could cut off Qin Wushuang's head with a single slash. He was now regretting his cowardice. If he had not escaped and fought with Qin Wushuang. Even if he was no match for him, he would at least have a chance. However, he did not have the courage to do so. He had been scared out of his wits by Lei Jiao's death. Now that he had fallen into this damned restriction, he was in a dilemma. He tried his best to rush out, but was shot back by Qin Wushuang. How could Yin Zhuiyang not be furious? Although he was angry, Yin Zhuiyang knew that he could not give up until the last moment. He was now in the turbulent whirlpool and could already feel that the turbulent power was slightly weaker than before. He tried his best to get closer to the inner side. He decided that even if his internal injuries were to worsen, he would destroy another pillar and rush in the direction of the main hall. At this moment, Qin Wushuang's position was on the outer side. With the restriction of these 9 pillars, it was impossible for Qin Wushuang to bypass this restriction and enter the inner side of the main hall. Therefore, as long as he could destroy another pillar and enter the inner side of the main hall, he would be able to avoid Qin Wushuang's supreme Dao Bao and enter the main hall. As long as he entered the building, he would be separated from Qin Wushuang by a restriction. If Qin Wushuang wanted to chase after him, he would have to pass through this restriction first. Even if Qin Wushuang could pass through smoothly, he would at least be able to buy some time. At this moment, time was life. Yin Zhuiyang made up his mind. He brewed the remaining energy in his dantian and slowly swam towards the pillars in the direction of the main hall. P.S. Thank you. It's really a crown. I can't believe it. That's all for today. Starting tomorrow, I will resume my high volume of updates. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 604. The crazy Yin Zhuiyang swam towards the inner pillar. Qin Wushuang observed for a moment and realized Yin Zhuiyang's intention. Yin Zhuiyang clearly wanted to enter the inner part of the palace. If this was the lair of the immemorial demonic dragon, it would not be a good thing for Yin Zhuiyang to enter the coiling dragon palace hall. What if Yin Zhuiyang got there first and obtained the bloodline of the immemorial demonic dragon? After being baptized by the bloodline of the demonic dragon, his bloodline would suddenly mutate and he would obtain supreme power. This possibility was not impossible. Looking at Yin Zhuiyang again, he was already approaching the inner pillar. Although Yin Zhuiyang had pushed his primordial spirit to the limit and was almost at the end of his tether, if he could destroy the pillar, he would be able to enter the coiling dragon palace hall directly. If the bloodline of the immemorial demonic dragon was really inherited, Yin Zhuiyang might get it. No matter what, he would not allow such a situation to happen. With a thought, Qin Wushuang activated the supreme Dao shield. Like a flying boat, he rushed towards the inner pillar. Seeing Qin Wushuang enter, Yin Zhuiyang became nervous. He activated all the power in his body and waved his long saber, slashing madly at the inner pillar. He only had one thought now, which was to rush out of this giant whirlpool and escape into the coiling dragon palace hall. Qin Wushuang also knew that the graceful spiritual bow would not be accurate in this turbulent flow. The turbulent flow of the whirlpool was so strong that it had exceeded the water pressure of 5,000 zhang. With Qin Wushuang's current cultivation, it would be very difficult for him to ignore this turbulent flow of the whirlpool. Therefore, he did not press too hard. Instead, he took advantage of the time when Yin Zhuiyang was attacking the inner pillar with all his strength to slowly swim and follow the supreme Dao shield. At the same time, he could also guard against Yin Zhuiyang's sudden attack. This shield could be used for both offense and defense. As long as Qin Wushuang got close to Yin Zhuiyang, he could activate the supreme Dao shield and attack Yin Zhuiyang. Yin Zhuiyang was already at the end of his tether. Qin Wushuang was naturally clear about this. As for Qin Wushuang, although he had rushed over a long distance, his consumption was also huge. It was just that after Qin Wushuang consumed it, he would immediately replenish his spiritual power with the spiritual power origin bead, so it was basically equivalent to zero consumption. Today, Qin Wushuang finally realized that none of the 6 treasures left by Lu Xianlu were useless. At first, he didn't think much of the spiritual power elemental bead, but when used at a critical moment, it was really heaven-defying. Compared to Yin Jueyang, who was like an arrow at the end of its flight, Qin Wuxuang was a fresh force. Therefore, within this chaotic whirlpool, Qin Wuxuang's movements were much more nimble than Yin Jueyang. Most importantly, Qin Wuxuang's body had been baptized by the divine light. His physical condition was comparable to an elite warrior of the supreme Tao. Under the pressure of the turbulence, he would not be in a sorry state like Yin Jueyang. When Yin Jueyang saw Qin Wuxuang approaching him step by step, he became even more anxious. With a few slashes, he had destroyed the huge dragon pillar outside. However, his primordial spirit had already been consumed, and he had already passed his peak state. After a dozen consecutive slashes, he still couldn't destroy the huge dragon pillar. When he looked back, Qin Wuxuang was already 100 feet away. Even in the chaotic whirlpool, a distance of 100 feet was enough for him to launch an attack. Yin Jueyang was both shocked and furious. He knew that if he was unable to create a gap, he would die. In his anxiety, he increased his strength by a bit. The desire to live, accompanied by the courage to struggle before death, allowed Qin Wuxuang to finally create a crack on the huge dragon pillar. Yin Jueyang was overjoyed. He knew that once the crack appeared, the huge pillar wouldn't be far from collapsing. Immediately, he waved his arm with all his strength and roared, "Open for me!" Boom! Yin Jueyang only felt that everything in front of him had suddenly become clear. His body rushed forward, and he actually rushed out of the gap. He was free. Yin Jueyang was overjoyed. He no longer cared about Qin Wuxuang behind him and rushed towards the inside of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. His speed of escape was comparable to lightning. It was impossible to tell that he was a person who had suffered from serious internal injuries and was on the verge of death. Qin Wuxuang was only a step away from catching up with Yin Jueyang. In the end, Yin Jueyang still escaped from under his nose. However, as soon as that giant pillar had fallen, the pressure Qin Wuxuang felt had also become much more relaxed. In addition, Qin Wuxuang had the supreme Tao shield to open the way. Without wasting much energy, he rushed out of the chaotic whirlpool and reached the entrance of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. The jade steps of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall were filled with the blood that Yin Jueyang had vomited. Every mouthful of blood was red and stained all the way. Qin Wuxuang followed the smell of blood. In a short while, he had walked through thousands of jade steps and arrived in front of a magnificent palace. Qin Wuxuang raised his head and looked. The huge head of the coiling dragon was entrenched above the main palace hall. Looking at it from a close distance, the grandeur of the building was even more apparent. It made one feel ashamed of one's inferiority. Compared to the coiling Dragon Palace Hall, Qin Wuxuang's body was as small as an ant. Looking at the dragon head that was glaring at the sky, Qin Wuxuang's heart was extremely shocked. What shocked Qin Wuxuang the most was not the psychological deterrence brought by the building itself. Instead, it was the restriction in the palace hall that made Qin Wuxuang's observant finger jade plate unable to operate. When Qin Wuxuang saw that the observant finger jade plate was unable to display anything, he realized that the coiling Dragon Palace Hall was indeed extraordinary. Since the observant finger jade plate was unable to operate, Yin Jueyang's whereabouts could not be captured. This was what Qin Wuxuang was most worried about. Thinking of this, Qin Wuxuang did not stop for even a moment. He rushed in and passed through the main door of the palace hall. After entering the main palace hall, Qin Wuxuang finally understood what grandeur was. After passing through the main door of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall, there was a wide blood-red abyss in front of him. The water in the abyss was dark red, as if fresh blood was flowing on top of it. There were two long bridges leading to the other side of the river. The bridges were in the shape of a rainbow. They looked both real and illusory. It was almost impossible to tell if they were real or fake. What surprised Qin Wuxuang the most was that on the left bridge, Yin Jueyang was standing at the highest point. He shouted at Qin Wuxuang, "Qin Wuxuang, if you have the guts, come and chase me." Qin Wuxuang was stunned. How did Yin Jueyang become so arrogant in the blink of an eye? It turned out that in front of the two bridges, there were two stone tablets. On the stone tablets were written, Heaven and Earth Coiling Dragon Palace Hall, Yin Yang Life and Death Bridge. Under these 10 words, there are also a few lines of small words. It said that these two bridges were life and death. If one was not careful and walked onto the bridge of death, there would only be one outcome, and that was death. As for the bridge of life, only the person who walked onto it first would have a path of life, and those who follow behind would also have a path of death. Qin Wushuang felt a chill in his heart. He finally understood why Yin Jueyang was so fearless. Regardless of whether Yin Jueyang chose the path of life or the path of death, Qin Wushuang would not chase after him. Because if Yin Jueyang chose the path of death, then Qin Wushuang would only be accompanying him in death if he chased after him. If he chose the path of life, then only the person who entered first would have a path of life. Those who followed would also have a path of death. It was no wonder that Yin Jueyang was so proud. He had obviously thought of this. Qin Wushuang narrowed his eyes. Looking at Yin Jueyang's ugly behavior, he could not make up his mind. The two bridges had already decided that either he or Yin Jueyang could live, or both of them would die. At this moment, neither of them knew which of these two bridges led to life and which led to death. Therefore, the chances of survival were the same for both of them. It was a 50-50 chance. It was no wonder that Yin Jueyang was so proud. Qin Wushuang, don't tell me you're so awesome. Aren't you arrogant? If you have the ability, then come and chase after me. Yin Jueyang's belly full of anger could finally be vented. After being chased by Qin Wushuang for so long, his vitality had been greatly damaged. Now that he could vent his anger, how could he not sit there and wait for Qin Wushuang to come? What? Are you mute? Yin Jueyang laughed wantonly. Haven't you always been very lucky? Today, let's have a competition and see whose luck is better. Let's see if you walk on the path of death, or if I walk on the path of death. Qin Wushuang stared at the two bridges. For a moment, he did not know how to choose. He knew that there were only two possibilities. Either Yin Jueyang successfully entered the main hall, and Qin Wushuang could not chase after him. Or the other possibility was that Yin Jueyang walked on the path of death, and Qin Wushuang could sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor, and choose the other bridge to pass through. If Yin Jueyang was the first to arrive and walked on the correct path, then the only thing Qin Wushuang could do was to leave immediately. Otherwise, if Yin Jueyang obtained the immemorial demonic dragon bloodline of the Coiling Dragon Palace, and even controlled the mechanisms and restrictions of the Coiling Dragon Palace, Qin Wushuang would die without a burial place. Thinking of this, Qin Wushuang simply sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes. He allowed Yin Jueyang to continue his wild clamor. Of course, Yin Jueyang was not appeased. He continued to scold. Qin Wushuang, do you think that I won't scold you just because you're sitting there pretending to be a grandson? You're just a nouveau riche from the human countries. Didn't you just get lucky a few times? Do you really think that you are a god's favored one? All right, now is your chance to prove yourself. What's wrong? Didn't I leave a bridge for you to walk on? If you have the ability, then go up and see who is the real god's favored one. Qin Wushuang really wanted to shoot Yin Jueyang to death with an arrow. However, the restrictions of the Coiling Dragon Palace made him unable to use a divine Dao weapon. When Yin Jueyang saw Qin Wushuang sitting there like a clay sculpture, he also felt his mouth was thirsty after he scolded him for a while. Qin Wushuang's attitude of turning a deaf ear to him also made him feel extremely disappointed, as he did not enjoy himself to the fullest. However, he was very clear about his situation. If he continued to scold, his dantian would not be able to recover. At that moment, he could only leave resentfully and walk towards the other end of the bridge. Coiling Dragon Palace, I am coming. If I, Yin Jueyang, have enough luck, please bestow this blessing upon me. Yin Jueyang prayed in his heart. Every step he took felt like he was walking in circles at the gates of hell. His little heart was also being severely tested with every step he took. Seeing that he was getting closer and closer to the bridge, Yin Jueyong felt that victory was already in his hands. When he stepped on the other end of the bridge, Yin Jueyong could not help but raise his arms and shout. He had crossed the bridge. He had successfully crossed the bridge. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 605. Hearing Yin Jueyong's cheer, Qin Wushuang's calm heart immediately rippled. He thought in surprise, could it be that Yin Jueyong had really found a path to survival? Yin Jueyong laughed complacently. Qin Wushuang, did you see that? I am safe and sound. Ha ha. Qin Wushuang, in the end, you can't beat me in terms of luck. Now, do you still have the guts to chase me? Ha ha. Yin Jueyong felt very relieved. He was now fearless and had the capital to be arrogant. Qin Wushuang could only look at his back and feel angry. Because he was safe and sound, it meant that the bridge he had taken was the path to survival. No matter what choice Qin Wushuang made, there was no way he could survive. Therefore, Qin Wushuang's most sensible choice was to get out of here immediately. Thinking of how Qin Wushuang had chased him for so long and could only run away with his tail between his legs, the joy in Yin Jueyong's heart could not be described with words. Qin Wushuang sighed. Was he really going to let Yin Jueyong slip away right under his nose? To be honest, he was unwilling. However, these two steals were a perfect match with the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. They were obviously not something that Yin Jueyong could create in such a short period of time. In other words, if the contents of these two steals were true, Qin Wushuang would have no other choice but to leave. While his mind was in chaos, Yin Jueyong's complacent laughter sounded again. Qin Wushuang, if you have the guts, just sit there and don't leave. I will come out to entertain you. Yin Jueyong was obviously not a fool. He knew that if he could really control the coiling Dragon Palace Hall, it would be as easy as flipping his hand to kill Qin Wushuang in this territory. Previously, he was worried that Qin Wushuang would follow him like a ghost. Now, he was worried that Qin Wushuang would run away. Therefore, he wanted to use words to provoke Qin Wushuang. Aha! Qin Wushuang, I would like to see if your heavenly Emperor Qin clan would rather die standing than live kneeling. Would this awesome slogan come true on you? If you run away, then you are a coward, the scum of the heavenly Emperor Mountain. It proves that the heavenly Emperor Qin clan is only a hypocrite fishing for fame, a coward that runs away from the battle. Yin Jueyong did not choose his words carefully. How was he still a young cultivator in his prime? His tone was more like that of a child who had just gotten into a fight with his companions. At this moment, Qin Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. A kind of innate intuition gave Qin Wushuang a wonderful feeling. This was a subconscious thought that seemed to flash before Qin Wushuang's eyes. In this instant, a thought emerged in his mind. This Yin Jueyong was feeling proud too early. Indeed, before Qin Wushuang had finished this thought, suddenly, the entire coiling Dragon Palace Hall erupted with rays of light. A burst of blood-red light spread out and rolled around the entire hall. While Yin Jueyong was feeling proud, his entire body was rolled in by this blood-red light. Like an enraged demonic beast, that blood-red light rolled in and sent Yin Jueyong's flesh and blood flying. He turned into a foul wind and blood rain and fell into that blood-red abyss. With a plop sound, that supreme Dao Long blade also dropped into that blood-red abyss. It emitted bursts of violent bubbles and sank to the bottom. The bloody abyss was steaming with mist. It looked very ferocious, like a sleeping fierce beast, quietly flowing. Qin Wushuang's heart thumped, and he did not know whether he should be happy or worried. Logically speaking, this Yin Jueyong had caused him to chase after him for so long. Now that he had finally met with a mishap, he should be happy. In fact, Qin Wushuang did feel extremely happy about Yin Jueyong's death. However, at the same time, while he was feeling joyful at the coiling Dragon Palace Hall, that burst of oppressive presence made him feel worried. Looking at that blood-red abyss, Qin Wushuang was a little dazed. He raised his head and looked at the two rainbow bridges. One of them still had the blood that Yin Jueyong had spilled on it. As for the other bridge, it sat there quietly and motionlessly. Could this bridge be the path to survival? Qin Wushuang looked at the bridge that Yin Zhuiyang had abandoned and smiled bitterly in his heart. Yin Zhuiyang boasted about himself and claimed that his luck was good. In the end, he stepped onto the path of no return. It seems that luck might really be the will of the heavens. That Yin Zhuiyang was too complacent. Extreme joy begets sorrow. Although Yin Zhuiyang had chosen the other bridge, it had already proven that it would lead to death. However, Qin Wushuang did not rashly step onto the bridge in front of him. For some unknown reason, Qin Wushuang could not walk onto this bridge with a heart as calm as still water. There seemed to be a voice in his heart that was telling him that this bridge would also not lead to the path to survival. Qin Wushuang's intuition had always been very accurate. This time was no exception. Qin Wushuang knew that the secret of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall might bring him some fortuitous encounters. However, Qin Wushuang still controlled this greed. He felt that since these two bridges had brought him so much unknown fear, then the best way was to not step onto them. Avoidance was the best choice. When Qin Wushuang thought of this, he resolutely decided that even if that bridge led to the path to survival, he would not take it. He did not want to gamble with his life, because the gamble before him was not enough for him to use his life as a bargaining chip. When he thought of this, Qin Wushuang no longer hesitated and turned to leave. However, after taking a few steps, suddenly, Qin Wushuang seemed to have understood something. Strangely, he returned to the blood-colored abyss. He looked at the bubbling water inside the abyss. When he looked at the two stone tablets again, a bold idea suddenly flashed through Qin Wushuang's mind. The moment this idea appeared, it was extremely crazy and started to wreak havoc in his mind. As though there was a pair of invisible hands pushing him, Qin Wushuang activated the Divine Tao Shield. As though he was driving a flying boat, his entire body and the Divine Tao Shield formed a cone-shaped light ball and directly pierced into the blood-red abyss. This dash was perfectly controlled in terms of strength and technique. With this dash, the blood-red abyss was like a red curtain that was split in half. The red light suddenly shot up. This cone-shaped light ball actually continued to rush down into the abyss. This light ball was like a sharp blade created by heaven and earth. It split open the water curtain of the abyss layer by layer and continued to drill down. Yes, at that moment, Qin Wushuang felt as if a voice from the unseen world was telling him that those two bridges were not the way out. The real way out was inside the blood-red abyss. Qin Wushuang was rarely impulsive. However, under the bewitchment of this unknown voice, he did not hesitate to rush down. As his body continued to go deeper, Qin Wushuang became more and more determined. He felt that his choice was not wrong at all. This choice seemed to be a gamble, but in fact, it seemed to be the arrangement of heaven's will in the unseen world. The water on both sides shot up like arrows, and Qin Wushuang's body continued to drill into the abyss at a very fast speed. Suddenly, the water curtain on both sides closed and wrapped Qin Wushuang's body. In front of Qin Wushuang's eyes, there was only a pure red light. It was as if the entire world had suddenly become a blood-red Azura world. Just as Qin Wushuang was hesitating, this sinking force finally stopped. Qin Wushuang did not dare to be negligent. He blocked in front of him with a Divine Tao Shield and opened his eyes. In front of him was a wonderful world that made Qin Wushuang unable to breathe. There were railings carved out of white jade and bridges paved with golden bricks. They led to a large hall that was glittering with jewels. There were also various tall coral trees, strangely shaped stone sculptures of sea beasts, and various kinds of pearls and shells. It almost made one suspect that they had entered a legendary fairyland. Qin Wushuang's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, could this be a palace within a palace? It seemed that this place was perhaps the core area of the Coiling Dragon Palace Hall. It was the outer space of the Coiling Dragon Palace Hall. Qin Wushuang did not find this strange. The master of the Coiling Dragon Palace Hall could open up such an independent space in the Black Dead Sea. It was enough to prove how extravagant the master of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall was. It would not be difficult to build an independent space in the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. Thinking of this, Qin Wushuang was even more curious. He really wanted to know if this coiling Dragon Palace Hall was related to the immemorial demon dragon. After crossing that short bridge, Qin Wushuang felt a very calm and comfortable feeling. At this moment, there was no sign of danger in his heart. It was completely different from when he had passed through the turbulent whirlpool and entered the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. At that time, he felt oppressed everywhere. At this moment, he felt comfortable everywhere. Rather than calling this a palace, it was better to call it a small courtyard of the coiling Dragon Palace Hall. It was not large in scale, but the construction was very unique. Qin Wushuang walked around the small courtyard. Suddenly, his eyes fixed on a deep pool at the back of the courtyard. The pool water was serene and emitted a demonic azure color. Although this pool was not big, it was filled with a wave of strange presence. This presence was the familiar immemorial bloodline. Although it was different from Bao Bao's immemorial bloodline, it was somewhat similar. Could it be this is the place where the immemorial demon dragon resides? Looking at this pool, it was not very big. It was enough for a gigantic immemorial demon dragon. For a time, Qin Wushuang was stunned. Indeed, this pool had a miraculous presence. Without a doubt, this pool was definitely related to the immemorial demon dragon. It was because Qin Wushuang sensed that this presence was extremely strong. If there are truly dragon eggs laid by the immemorial demon dragon, I might as well take them. If I give them to Lord Mu Rong, I will have completed my mission. By that time, what would the higher-ups of the floating snow house have to say? Even if I don't care about those higher-ups, I cannot make things difficult for Su'er. When Qin Wushuang thought here, he jumped like a fish and dived into the pool. This pool was only the size of a small lake. As soon as Qin Wushuang dived in, his entire body shivered. This pool water was bone-piercing cold. It was the kind of cold that penetrated into the bone marrow. With the protection of the azure armor and the baptism of the supreme Tao light, Qin Wushuang's corporeal body could not be said to be weak. Despite this fact, he still felt bone-piercing cold. It was enough to see how cold this pond water was. The deeper he dived, the more intense this cold power became. Qin Wushuang's entire body was almost numb from the cold. What puzzled Qin Wushuang was that for such a cold pond, it should have turned into ice. However, this pool water that was many times lower than the freezing point did not freeze. Originally, I planned to resume my normal update today. However, today is the tomb sweeping day. I only have time to write at night. Let's not gossip. Tomorrow, I will explode to make up for my slacking off these days. Let's update tomorrow. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 606. Fortunately, Qin Wushuang's endurance was very good. Even though he felt that his whole body was about to freeze, Qin Wushuang still dived down with all his might. As he dived deeper, Qin Wushuang only felt that this pool of water seemed to be able to penetrate his body. It kept penetrating his skin through the surface of his body. Fortunately, Qin Wushuang felt that the penetrating power was not the cold air, but the powerful aura of the pool water itself. Qin Wushuang was puzzled. He was inwardly shocked. What's going on? When he circulated his dantian to resist, he found that his dantian, including the blood vessels in his body, welcomed this penetrating power very much and did not resist at all. This made Qin Wushuang very surprised. He never thought that his body would actually welcome this penetrating power. Qin Wushuang was extremely confident in his body's condition. Initially, when those two supreme Tao lights baptized his body, it caused his entire body's blood vessels, muscles, and bones to develop an extremely sensitive sense of touch. If an undesirable presence were to intrude, certainly it would resist. There was only one possibility for this penetrating power not to resist, and that was that this penetrating power did not have any malice or harm to his body. Otherwise, it would be impossible for his body not to resist at all. Instead, it would be very welcoming. Qin Wushuang was puzzled. Suddenly, his eyes widened and his mind tensed up. He could not help but activate the divine Tao shield in front of him. A huge demonic dragon was entrenched in the depths of the pool water. From afar, it looked like a blue sculpture. Since Qin Wushuang had stepped onto the path of martial arts, he had never seen such a fat spiritual beast. Of course, he was shocked. However, upon closer inspection, although the demonic dragon was entrenched there, it did not move at all. It was like a small hill and did not show any signs of attacking Qin Wushuang. Because the pool water was dark blue, Qin Wushuang could not see clearly at all. As he slowly dived closer, he found that this was only a demonic dragon's dharma body. Although the demonic dragon's body was still alive, it was obvious that the demonic dragon no longer had a primordial spirit or soul. It was just a body. No wonder this ferocious-looking demonic dragon did not attack the outsiders at all. It turned out that it was just a body. Even so, Qin Wushuang did not dare to let his guard down. He observed the demonic dragon for a moment before approaching it. Indeed, the body of this phantom dragon was gigantic. When it occupied the surrounding area, it was almost like a mountain range. When Qin Wushuang wandered next to it, he was as tiny as an insect walking under the feet of an elephant. Wow! Qin Wushuang looked at it for a while and clicked his tongue in wonder. Is this the legendary immemorial demonic dragon? Qin Wushuang was somewhat shocked. This was the dragon race, the true dragon race. Immemorial demonic dragon, the true bloodline of an immemorial divine beast. Qin Wushuang thought of Mu Rong, Qianji's mission, and began to look around. This pool was not very big. Although Qin Wushuang's divine sense was suppressed and could not spread very far, he still found 2 eggs that looked like they were carved out of white jade below the huge dragon after searching for a while. Could it be these are the eggs laid by the immemorial phantom dragon? Qin Wushuang looked at these 2 eggs that were much bigger than ordinary eggs with astonishment. Qin Wushuang used his divine sense to observe the 2 huge eggs. He found that there was a strong life force inside the huge eggs. Although the huge eggs had not hatched and might never hatch, Qin Wushuang was still very surprised. He looked at the huge dragon skeleton above his head and thought, this immemorial demonic dragon has been dead for who knows how long, but it could still leave behind such a bloodline. The dragon race is indeed different from other races. He didn't think too much about it and put the 2 eggs into his storage ring. He looked around again and made sure that there was nothing suspicious in the pool. Then he swam up. Whoosh! In the light of the water, Qin Wushuang rushed out of the water and jumped into the pool. He found a quiet corner and sat down. He circulated all the spiritual energy in his body and began to dispel the cold air in his body. At this moment, Qin Wushuang found that there was a very strange aura in his bloodline. What is this blue line in my bloodline? Just as Qin Wushuang was surprised, a strange blue light appeared on the surface of his body. This blue light appeared like a layer of faint crystal on the surface. Upon closer inspection, this layer of blue light was like a layer of scales that appeared and disappeared on the surface of Qin Wushuang's body. Qin Wushuang extended his hands to take a look. He found that there were ferocious dragon claws on his hands. They were so sharp that even he felt a chill in his heart. As for these dragon claws, just as Qin Wushuang was hesitating, the dragon claws disappeared again. After changing over and over again, Qin Wushuang found that these dragon scales and dragon claws were changing according to his thoughts. In other words, after a little practice, he could control them as he wished. What's going on? Could it be that in the deep pool, the bloodline of the immemorial monster dragon is imperceptibly influencing me and assimilating me into the dragon race? Qin Wushuang transmigrated from the 21st century. In the field of genes, there was a possibility that the genes of different races would fuse and influence each other. There was even the possibility of mutation. In the Tianxian continent, the law of survival of the fittest was even clearer than in his previous world. If the bloodline of the immemorial monster dragon was stronger than Qin Wushuang's bloodline, it was not impossible for it to assimilate his bloodline. However, after a moment of probing, Qin Wushuang knew that he was overthinking. It was because he realized that there were not many changes to his own bloodline. Although the bloodline of the monster dragon had fused into his bloodline and brought an extremely ancient, immemorial presence to Qin Wushuang, it did not devour his original presence. In other words, the bloodline of the immemorial monster dragon had only fused and not assimilated. This was what Qin Wushuang wanted to see. If he had been assimilated by the bloodline of the immemorial monster dragon, he would have been depressed. In the end, he still had a strong sense of identity with his human bloodline. If he had suddenly become the bloodline of the monster dragon race, he would certainly feel depressed. Fortunately, such a thing did not happen. The bloodline of the immemorial monster dragon had also brought him some unexpected gains. For example, he had obtained scales that were as strong as the defensive power of the immemorial monster dragon and dragon claws that could tear the void apart. These were all unexpected gains that the bloodline of the monster dragon had brought him. After spending a full week, Qin Wushuang finally fused with the bloodline of the monster dragon completely. After the complete fusion, Qin Wushuang's appearance no longer had the aura of the immemorial monster dragon. Unless Qin Wushuang activated the bloodline of the monster race himself and used the dragon race's mystique, the aura of the bloodline on his body was no different from usual. Qin Wushuang walked around the courtyard again, but did not find anything else. Qin Wushuang smiled bitterly and shook his head. He warned himself not to be too greedy. This was because he had heard that the dragon race was a race that loved to collect treasures. He felt that since the immemorial monster dragon was so powerful, it should have such a hobby, right? After searching around and finding nothing, Qin Wushuang was not depressed. Being able to find the bloodline of the monster dragon was already a pleasant surprise. At least, he could explain himself to the floating snow house. He did not find anything in the pool. When he returned to the courtyard, Qin Wushuang found the supreme Dao saber that Yin Zhuiyang had left behind. This was a pleasant surprise. Qin Wushuang did not hesitate to take it for himself. He did not feel guilty at all. If he had been killed by Yin Zhuiyang, someone like Yin Zhuiyang would not be courteous to the things he left behind. He would definitely take them all. On this trip, not only did he kill two strong opponents, Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang, but he also gained many benefits. Qin Wushuang was naturally very satisfied. Returning the way he came, he soon returned to the main hall of the coiling dragon palace from the bloody abyss. Qin Wushuang looked at the two bridges and felt very lucky. If he had chosen to walk on this bridge, no matter which way he walked, there would only be one result, right? While Qin Wushuang felt lucky, he also felt strange. Why did it seem like there was a voice deep in his heart guiding him? Could it be his subconscious? Qin Wushuang could not figure it out. He thought that perhaps all of this was related to the 7 deadly erase formation. Thinking about how he had been baptized by the 2 divine lights of the 7 deadly erase formation, it was not completely unacceptable that there were some peculiarities. Thinking of this, Qin Wushuang felt relieved. Without thinking about anything else, he walked out of the coiling dragon palace and passed through the mechanism formation set up by the 9 pillars. At this time, 2 of the 9 pillars had fallen, and the turbulent whirlpool was not as strong as before. Qin Wushuang had the supreme Dao shield to open the way. Soon, he walked out of the turbulent whirlpool. Qin Wushuang was more worried that if the space of the coiling dragon palace was independent of the Black Dead Sea, then he would have to go through a lot of trouble to leave the coiling dragon palace. Returning the way he came, Qin Wushuang indeed encountered a space barrier when he reached the exit. However, the coiling dragon palace was independent of the Black Dead Sea and could not be seen with the naked eye. In the coiling dragon palace, it was like being in an egg-shaped chaotic state. It was easier to get out. After getting out, it would depend on luck to get back in. After all, in the Black Dead Sea, it was impossible to see the outer space of the coiling dragon palace with the naked eye. Only when the outer space of the coiling dragon palace opened its door could people from the outside enter. At that time, Yin Zhuang had hit the outer space barrier of the Coiling Dragon Palace, which allowed the space of the Coiling Dragon Palace to open its door. After getting out of the Coiling Dragon Palace, Qin Wushuang felt more relaxed. Although there was a water pressure of 5,000 feet, Qin Wushuang had the protection of the Supreme Dao Shield. Although it was still very strenuous, it was not dangerous. Soon, he arrived at the water area of 4,000 feet and gathered with the sealed spiritual beasts. These sealed spiritual beasts listened to Qin Wushuang's orders and set up an ambush in this area. Fighting against the water pressure of over 4,000 feet consumed a lot of spiritual power. If Qin Wushuang did not return for a long time, it would be very disadvantageous for them. Therefore, when they saw that Qin Wushuang had returned safely, they were all very happy and excited. To be continued, if you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 607. Qin Wushuang gathered the people and called back all the sealed spiritual beasts into the sealed scrolls. This time, these sealed spiritual beasts did not object to returning to the seal. It was because although they had not experienced a bitter battle, they had consumed a lot of energy after resisting against the water pressure for almost a month. The sealed scrolls have been filled with spiritual qi from the ley lines of the heavenly Luo Taoist sect. It was the time when they had sufficient spiritual qi. Therefore, it would be a wise choice to return and bide their time. After Qin Wushuang packed everything, he finally calmed his mind. He pinched his fingers and counted carefully. From the time he had departed until now, more than 2 months had passed. Although there was still more than half a month before the 3-month deadline, the speed at which time had passed still made Qin Wushuang sigh. Afraid that those who cared about him would worry, Qin Wushuang did not linger and floated up from the Black Dead Sea. Compared to diving down, it was much easier to float up. Plus, with the powerful presence emitted from Qin Wushuang's entire body, those underwater spiritual beasts were not blind enough to provoke Qin Wushuang. Therefore, Qin Wushuang's journey up was smooth. It was already afternoon. The mood of the people waiting on the hillside was completely different compared to a month ago. Ever since Wu Dingyuan had escaped before the battle, the atmosphere had changed completely. Initially, the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect that had a card up their sleeve began to feel restless. Especially as time had passed, and there was still no news, it had caused their restlessness to become even more intense. Counting the days, there was not much time left in the 3-month deadline. Each day, they came with hope and left with disappointment. For more than 2 months, it had caused their nerves to suffer. Especially Lei Ming. He wanted to tear up the agreement several times and go down to the Black Dead Sea to investigate. However, if he did it, it would be the same as slapping the face of the Heavenly Emperor Gate. With Xi and Wuji at the scene, even if Lei Ming had this intention, he did not have the guts. Therefore, he could only feel anxious. On the other hand, that Yin Guinan was even more calm as he suppressed the worry inside his heart. Regardless, they must not lose to the Qin clan in terms of temperament, and let that madman Qin Yunran see them as a joke. Qin Yunran still remained calm and collected. Each day, his smile was as brilliant as the sunshine of the early spring. From time to time, he would strike up a conversation with Xi and Wuji and chat with Murong Qianji. From his movements, it seemed that one could not see any worries. Although Xi and Wuji did not know where Qin Yunran's confidence came from, through his observation of Qin Wushuang, he knew that Qin Wushuang was indeed someone important. To Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao, it was definitely a tough bone to chew. For this battle, although Xi and Wuji favored the combination of Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao, ever since Wu Dingyuan had fled back in a panic, Xi and Wuji had a strong premonition. The sound of Thunder Sect and the Heavenly Punishing Villa were most likely going to suffer this time. For Murong Su, these 2 months were equally unbearable. For the Heavenly Punishing Villa and the Thunder, this might only be a contest between the young disciples. However, to Murong Su, it meant everything. Little Bamboo, there are 13 days left. do you think Brother Qin will be able to return in the agreed time? Murong Su asked with a light voice. Little Bamboo knew Mrs. Temperament well. She knew that although Miss was asking, she was not truly asking for her opinion. She was only talking to herself out of habit. As she looked at Mrs. frail body, she felt incredibly touched inwardly. Inwardly, she muttered, Young Master Qin, oh young Master Qin, you cannot abandon Mississippi. You can't afford to let young Miss down. Looking at the black Dead Sea in a daze, Little Bamboo could not help but ask, Miss, in the history of our floating snow house, how many people have entered the black Dead Sea for training? Many people in each generation are qualified to enter. Only, you must reach the transformation void martial stage to be qualified. Ordinary young disciples can at most move within the 300 or 400 meter area. Transformation void martial stage. Little Bamboo blinked her eyes. Miss, aren't you at the transformation void martial stage? Murong Su nodded. Yes, but Daddy said that if I want to go in, I must at least reach the perfect void martial stage. Why? Little Bamboo felt this was unfair as she cried out. The perfect void martial stage is too far away. Miss, how many years will it take for you to reach the perfect void martial stage? Silly girl, how could I say this? However, even if I reached the perfect void martial stage, it would be useless. My daddy said that the water below 1,000 meters is the most dangerous area of the Black Dead Sea. Without the protection of a supreme Tao weapon, the perfect void martial stage would not be able to go that deep. Even my daddy could not do whatever he wanted in the water below 1,000 meters. Little Bamboo stuck out her tongue and said with a worried tone, Then if young Master Qin and the others enter the water recklessly, wouldn't it be dangerous? Miss, do you think young Master Qin will go that deep? He will. Murong Su was certain that in order to acquire the bloodline of the immemorial Phantom Dragon, it was necessary to dive into the water below 1,000 meters. With Qin Wushuang's personality, it would be impossible for him to shrink back. Now, he was worried about whether Qin Wushuang could acquire the bloodline of the Phantom Dragon. Instead, he was worried about Qin Wushuang's safety. Whether or not he could acquire the bloodline of the Phantom Dragon, Murong Su's heart was as firm as a rock. It only belonged to Qin Wushuang. The bloodline of the immemorial Phantom Dragon would not be in the water above 1,000 meters. For this point, everyone in the floating snow house had reached a consensus. Generations of leaders of the floating snow house had all gone to explore the Black Dead Sea. Some people had also taken a risk and dived into the water below 1,000 meters. They endured the powerful water pressure and risked their primordial spirit to search for the cave dwelling left behind by the immemorial Phantom Dragon. However, for a few thousand years they had found nothing. If not for the historical records, everyone in the floating snow house would have doubted whether the cave dwelling left behind by the immemorial Phantom Dragon really existed under the Black Dead Sea. To be honest, other than the records and the historical records, no one had really seen it. Not to mention Murong Su, who was deeply worried. Even the master of the floating snow house, Murong Qianji, could not help but doubt whether his original idea was right or wrong. More than 2 months had passed. Other than Wu Dingyuan, who had escaped, there was no news from Qin Wushuang, Lei Jiao, or Yin Zhuiyang. The Black Dead Sea seemed to be in a deep slumber. There was no reaction at all. Look! Suddenly, someone shouted. What? Everyone's gaze turned towards the water surface. The water surface was as calm as before. There was no reaction at all. Following the direction of the finger of the person who shouted, everyone saw a figure flying towards them at high speed from the horizon. The speed was so fast that it was like a spiritual bird flying at full speed. This person was Qin Wushuang, who was flying in the air. When he floated to the surface from his area, he was already thousands of miles away from his starting point. Now, when he flew back, he did not activate the purple cloud in Yang wings. Naturally, he did not want to reveal too much of his strength. It's Qin Wushuang. Lei Ming's heart sank as he said with a hoarse voice. Yin Gainen's eyesight was on par with Lei Ming. Clearly, he also saw the arrival of Qin Wushuang. His heart twitched. Could it be? Instantly, a wave of ominous premonition emerged. Qin Yunran roared with laughter. Good kid, good kid. Even Xian Wuji looked at Qin Wushuang with some astonishment. Since he was able to come back alive after fighting 1 against 4, he must admit that this Qin Wushuang was not simple. Mu Rong Qianji and the group of higher-ups of the Floating Snow House felt incredibly depressed, especially Mu Rong Qianhuan and Mu Rong Qianshan. These two people who had always opposed Qin Wushuang appear to be even more shocked. After all, from the beginning, they did not think highly of Qin Wushuang. It would be too difficult to stand out when fighting 1 against 4. However, this Qin Wushuang had done it. Previously, as long as one was not brainless, they could see that although it was a fair competition, in fact it was a conspiracy to fight 1 against 4. Since the chief of the aspiring Throne Mountain did not say anything, naturally no one stepped out to fight for justice. Because of this reason, everyone knew that in the end, either Qin Wushuang would come back or the others would come back alive. There would be no other result. Now, when they saw Qin Wushuang, everyone instantly understood that most likely Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang had met with misfortune. Brother Qin, in the past 2 months, Murong Su had been working hard to control her emotions. Now, when she saw the return of Qin Wushuang, one could imagine the joy inside her heart. Even with her temperament that remained calm amidst the chaos, she could not refrain from feeling somewhat shaken. She jogged up to welcome him. Qin Wushuang grabbed Murong Su's hands and cried out with extreme joy, "Su heir, did I make you wait long?" Murong Su was filled with endless happiness. She was so happy that she could not speak. She nodded and felt something was wrong as she shook her head. Inside her eyes, there were already moist eyeballs rolling. "Haha, miss, I told you that young Master Qin would return safely." Filled with joy, Murong Su pulled Qin Wushuang's hands and looked at him carefully. It was as if she was afraid that Qin Wushuang would lose a single strand of hair. At this moment, Qin Yunran did not care to spoil the fun as he laughed. "Wushuang, well done. Where are those guys?" Now, Qin Wushuang realized that hundreds of pairs of eyes were looking at them. He smiled lightly at Murong Su and patted the back of Murong Su's beautiful and tender hand twice with his right hand to motion her to wait. Murong Qianji also walked over and asked with a smile, "Nephew Wushuang, from your expression, it seems you have succeeded? Lord Murong must be joking." Qin Wushuang sighed endlessly and did not answer Murong Qianji's words directly. Of course, he knew that Murong Qianji was hinting to ask him about the bloodline of the immemorial Phantom Dragon. However, inwardly, Qin Wushuang had another idea as he did not plan to publicize it. The bloodline of the immemorial Phantom Dragon was a bloodline of the Supreme Tao. Most likely, people here would be jealous of it. "Wushuang, since you are up, hurry and report to His Highness," Qin Yunran reminded him. Now, Qin Wushuang remembered that His Highness of the Heavenly Emperor Gate was in charge of this matter. Since he had come up, it was normal for him to report to Xian Wuji. Inexplicably, although this Xian Wuji had a graceful bearing and outstanding temperament, inwardly, Qin Wushuang always kept some necessary vigilance against him. "It's Qin Wushuang's honor to meet with your highness." Xian Wuji revealed a light smile and did not appear to have waited for more than 2 months. It was as if he had just passed by and did not show the slightest impatience. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 608. Xian Wuji fixed his gaze on Qin Wushuang for a moment and asked, "Brother Qin, how was your harvest from this trip?" No wonder he was the son of the Heavenly Emperor of the Heavenly Emperor Gate. Although this Xian Wuji did not appear to be much older than Qin Wushuang, his temperament made Qin Wushuang not dare to neglect him. However, Qin Wushuang was not suppressed by this Xian Wuji. Instead, he laughed leisurely. "Your Highness, to tell you the truth, as soon as I entered the Black Dead Sea, I was chased by the 4 of them at full power. What I have gained?" Xian Wuji was stunned. He did not expect that Qin Wushuang would speak this way. From his tone, it seemed he was protesting and slightly dissatisfied. However, when Qin Wushuang spoke these words, he carried a smile. For the time being, Xi and Wuji could not figure out Qin Wushuang's approach. He could only say with a smile, "Before entering the Black Dead Sea, you all had an agreement that you could chase each other to death. Your life and death would depend on fate. Therefore, even if you were chased by a group of people, it's allowed by the rules. Isn't that right? If you were scared, you should not have gone down. Didn't I warn you?" Lei Ming looked at Qin Wushuang with some disdain. "What's the use of crying now?" Qin Wushuang shot a glance at Lei Ming as if he was looking at an idiot. He asked with a strange expression, "Did I say I was scared? If you're not scared, why are you complaining?" "You sound like you were complaining," Lei Ming mocked. Qin Wushuang laughed. "Complaining? Why would I want to complain? I'm only stating a fact to your highness." The corner of Lei Ming's mouth twitched, yet he found it hard to refute Qin Wushuang's words. On the other hand, Yin Guinan was feeling somewhat nervous inwardly. From time to time, he would look at the water surface. He truly hoped that Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao could crawl out from under the Black Dead Sea. Even if they did not succeed in killing Qin Wushuang, as long as nothing happened to them, it would not count as a loss. Although Qin Yunran appeared to be straightforward, inwardly, he was as clear as a mirror. He asked deliberately, "Wushuang, they're chasing after you. Are you not going to do anything?" Hearing Qin Wushuang's question, Yin Guinan's heart twitched. He also wanted to know how Qin Wushuang had responded and where Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao were. A trace of a cold smile flashed across the corner of Qin Wushuang's mouth. "Response? My response is the same as any martial artist in the Tianxian land." "Oh," Qin Yunran and Qin Wushuang echoed each other. They blinked deliberately and pretended to be very curious. "Tell me quickly, what did you do to them?" Qin Wushuang asked Murong Qinji. "Lord Murong, back then, the agreement was that whoever found the dragon bloodline would be considered the winner, right?" Murong Qinji did not know why he would suddenly ask such a question, but he subconsciously nodded. "That's right. I once promised that whoever could obtain the Dragon Clan's bloodline and offer it to my floating snow house will be the first candidate to become my Murong Qinji's son-in-law." These words did exist. After Qin Wushuang had finished listening, he nodded and asked, "However, if no one found the dragon bloodline, how could the victor be determined?" No one found the dragon bloodline? Although it was expected, a trace of disappointment still flashed across Murong Qinji's face. He mumbled, "If no one found the dragon bloodline, then it's not easy to make a decision. However, you guys made a later agreement that you could hunt each other down. The person that could walk out alive should be the winner, right? Although the Black Dead Sea was gigantic, 3 months was enough for many things to be done." "Your Highness, is this how it is?" Qin Wushuang turned around to ask Xi and Wuji. Per their agreement before their departure, it was allowed to hunt each other down. If no one acquired the dragon bloodline and no one won in advance, then the only way to determine the victor would be through life and death. Thinking here, everyone was shocked inwardly. They looked at Qin Wushuang with astonishment. Clearly, they realized something. Yin Guinan asked with a low voice, "Qin Wushuang, what happened to Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao?" Lei Ming also realized that something was wrong as he shouted, "You killed them?" Qin Yunran roared with laughter, seemingly unintentionally. In fact, he walked before Qin Wushuang to stop him. He said, "What? Only your people are allowed to hunt my disciples? Could it be that the disciples of the Qin clan are not allowed to fight back? Wushuang, don't be afraid. Just say what you did. As the chief, today, regardless, I must make a decision for you." A form of urgent hatred flashed across the pupils of Yin Guinan and Lei Ming as they glared at Qin Wushuang. Qin Wushuang was not the slightest afraid as he said coldly, "That's right, those 4 chased after me together. After I saw through their plan, I thought of a strategy to defeat them one by one. If you want to wait for Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao to return, then don't. By the way, there is also Hu Qilan. All 3 of them were killed by me. Unfortunately, one of them slipped through the net, and I don't know where he escaped to. If it weren't for the fact that it's almost the 3-month deadline, I would never have let this fish out of the net have an easy time. Qin Yunran laughed. Wushuang, I forgot to tell you, there's one more that you cannot do anything to. It's because he has already become a deserter and escaped here. He said that he saw the method you used to deal with Huqilan. He was scared out of his wits and fled back. At this moment, how could everyone still have the mind to think about Wu Dingyuan, that deserter? Inwardly, they were thinking about how Qin Wushuang had killed Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang by himself. The more they thought about it, the more astonished they felt. This Qin Wushuang was truly monstrous. For your information, although Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao were not super geniuses, they were the most well-known figures in their respective sections. If these two joined hands, and with the supreme Dao weapons bestowed by their sex, they still could not deal with Qin Wushuang. Once this result was confirmed by Qin Wushuang, the shock it produced was apparent. Lei Ming roared on the spot. Impossible! Qin Wushuang, what are you bragging about? With your background in the human countries, how could you have killed Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang? Yin Guinan was different from Lei Ming. He narrowed his eyes and sized Qin Wushuang up. With his observation skills as a supreme Dao elite warrior, he sadly realized that this Qin Wushuang did not seem to be bragging. Especially that trace of disdain overflowing from the corner of Qin Wushuang's mouth. It seemed to indicate that he had not exerted all his strength to kill Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang. Mu Rongqinji was also greatly shocked. Was this Qin Wushuang truly this exceptional? For your information, when Mu Rongqinji met Qin Wushuang at the crest mountain of the Judge Mountain Prefecture, he was only a young man that had just entered the refined void martial stage. Now, in less than 2 years, this Qin Wushuang had grown to such extent. Not only did he take charge of an area alone, he had killed 4 elite warriors at the profound void martial stage when they had surrounded him. Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang were elite warriors with supreme Dao weapons. Mu Rongqinhuan and Mu Rongqinshan also looked at each other in dismay. Vividly, they realized that their previous opposition to Qin Wushuang seemed to be too obvious. This Qin Wushuang was much more powerful than they had imagined. Could it be another descendant in defiance of the natural order is about to emerge from the aspiring, throne-mounted Qin clan? Inwardly, such a thought flashed across Mu Rongqinji's mind. The Heavenly Emperor Qin clan had the bloodline of the immemorial era. For tens and thousands of years, they had never left the Heavenly Emperor Mountain. Even during the most difficult times, they had never been pushed out of the Heavenly Emperor 8 gates. Each time, when the Heavenly Emperor Qin clan had fallen to the lowest point, a disciple of the Qin clan would always appear out of nowhere to save the clan from calamity. It seemed that this Qin clan had truly received the care of the heavens. During the transition between prosperity and decline, although they could not escape the heavenly fate of the cycle of prosperity and decline, they were able to stand firmly in the Heavenly Emperor Mountain that was filled with elite warriors and not get defeated. One must admit that this Qin clan had a tough life. Yin Guinan revealed an incredibly grim expression. He was completely certain that regardless of Yin Zhuiyang or Lei Jiao, they were no longer here. And the murderer that had killed them was this Qin Wushuang. Lei Ming was unconvinced as he only whispered, "I just don't believe it. How much skill does this Qin Wushuang have? Surely he is boasting." Qin Wushuang, you said you won. Do you have any proof? Qin Wushuang said coldly, "Why would I need proof? When the 3-month period comes, and they have not come up, everything will be verified." Yin Guinan said coldly, "Qin Wushuang, are you pretending to be stupid? Or are you trying to take advantage of us?" "Oh, what do you mean?" Qin Yunran was also somewhat confused. Yin Guinan, could it be you want to intimidate the later generation of the Qin clan before me? Yin Guinan said lightly, "Madman Ran, don't be arrogant. For this Qin Wushuang, even if he killed Lei Jiao and Yin Zhuiyang, he should know when to stop. He should return those 2 supreme Dao weapons to our sect. Could it be he wants to keep them for himself?" Yin Guinan's words were his last test. to know whether those two were dead or not. It was simple. He would show them the supreme Tao weapons they once possessed. Since Qin Wushuang had killed them, it was impossible for him not to take away the supreme Tao weapons. Supreme Tao weapons? Qin Yunran laughed deliberately. Wushuang, have you ever seen such things? Qin Wushuang knew that the second chief was doing this deliberately. He also revealed a confused expression. What supreme Tao weapons? I have never seen them. Besides, even if I got them, what reason would I have to return them to you? Is there a rule in the contract and the rules? Clearly, the rules and the contract did not specify how to deal with the equipment if someone died. Since there were no rules, then they would do it according to the old rules of the Tianxian land. They would kill and seize the treasures in one go. Whoever killed the person would take the equipment of the victim. With a gloomy face, Yin Guinan said with a cold sneer, Madman Ran, could it be that your Qin clan has the appetite to swallow the supreme Tao weapons? Are you not afraid of bursting your belly? Qin Yunran did not find it shameful, but rather proud. He revealed a lazy expression. Yin Guinan, forgive me for speaking bluntly. Among those supreme Tao weapons of the heavenly punishing villa, how many of them were originally possessed by the heavenly punishing villa? If I remember correctly, your heavenly punishing villa walked step by step from a third-rate powerhouse. You relied on seizing other people's belongings, right? Before Yin Guinan could respond, Lei Ming almost jumped up. Qin Yunran did not even allow Lei Ming to speak as he said with a cold sneer, Junior Lei Ming, don't jump. 10,000 years ago, your Sound of Thunder sect did not even have these words. For your Sound of Thunder sect to hold the supreme Tao weapons, don't you find them scalding? When Qin Yunran said this, he cupped his hands in a salute at Exine Wuji. Your Highness, please forgive me for speaking bluntly. If they had killed my disciples, would they return the equipment on my disciples to the Qin clan? Exine Wuji was stumped by this question. If he were to answer yes, it would appear that he was deceiving himself and others. It would be something impossible to happen. To speak a lie through his teeth would be an insult to his own intelligence. However, if he were to answer no, wouldn't it be the same as speaking for the Qin clan? For the time being, Exine Wuji had become silent. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.qijian.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 609. Qin Yunran knew the principle of striking while the iron was hot. He seemed to be talking to himself with a smile. Your Highness, the Heavenly Emperor Gate has always been the role model for many powerhouses in the Xianyuan Mount. Regardless of which powerhouse is in charge, it's the same. Therefore, you only need to speak a word of justice. Even if you want the Qin clan to return the supreme Tao weapon, as long as Wushuang gets it, I will return it with both hands. Please make the decision. This move seemed to respect Exine Wuji, the heir to the Heavenly Emperor Gate. In fact, he was throwing the hot potato to Exine Wuji and letting him make the decision. If Exine Wuji favored the Heavenly Punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect, it would be hard to avoid gossip. In the future, when dealing with major matters at the Heavenly Emperor Mountain, his prestige would certainly be affected. Therefore, Qin Yunran was certain that this Exine Wuji would not go back on his words. Even if he favored the Heavenly Punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect, he would never disregard the reputation of the Heavenly Emperor Gate. Indeed, after a moment of silence, Exine Wuji had clearly gone through a struggle inwardly. He said, if there was an agreement beforehand, of course we must return the supreme Tao weapon. On the contrary, without an agreement, per the general rules of the Tianxian land, there is no need to return it. As for the exact details, you three are all elite warriors of the supreme Tao stage. You can discuss the solution in private. Now, it's inappropriate to argue at the floating snow house. Qin Yunran laughed, as if he was demonstrating his power. He asked, did you two hear that? Since your Highness has spoken, there is no way you can get what you want. In private, besides fighting to the death, there is no room for discussion. Since you gave the supreme Tao weapon to a young man to commit crimes, you must be prepared to lose the weapon. Inwardly, Yangainen was furious. Yet, he knew that since Xian Wuji had spoken, it would be impossible to ask for it back in today's situation. However, Lei Ming did not give up. After all, even for the powerhouses of the Heavenly Emperor Eight Gates, the number of supreme Dao weapons they possess could be counted on one hand. Now, of course, he would feel the pain of losing one. It would have been alright if it was truly lost. However, when it fell into the hands of the Qin clan, it was the same as cutting his own flesh to mend the sores of the Qin clan. To harm oneself and benefit the enemy, such matter was the most depressing. Most importantly, in the end, Lei Ming still did not believe that this Qin Wushuang could truly kill Lei Jiao and Yen. Seeing was believing. Without seeing it with his own eyes, he still found it hard to believe. Your Highness, I don't really trust this kid's words and actions. I want to personally make a trip down to the Black Dead Sea to investigate. Even if I lose, I will accept it wholeheartedly, Lei Ming said stubbornly. Inwardly, Xian Wuji did not agree with him. After all, this sect leader of the Sound of Thunder sect was a chief of a region. How could he be so impatient? Before Xian Wuji had expressed his stance, Mu Rong Qianji and his brothers shook their heads to express their objection. Mu Rong Qianji said, Your Highness, this Black Dead Sea has been the forbidden area of my floating snow house for thousands of years. Aside from the sect's trial that is held once every 30 years, it is impossible for it to be open to the outside world. This time, it was also because of the special circumstances that he allowed these young people to enter. If he had known that this would be the end result, Qianji would never have suggested this idea. If Brother Lei Ming trusts me, Mu Rong Qianji, I will personally make a trip down. In addition, anyone who is not a member of the Floating Snow House is not allowed to trespass into the forbidden area of the Floating Snow House. Although Lei Ming was restraining his fear of Xian Wuji, it did not mean that he was restraining his fear of the Floating Snow House. In fact, regardless of the Sound of Thunder sect or the Heavenly Punishing Villa, they could be said to be unrestrained towards the Floating Snow House. Or else, certainly they would not have sent the young people of their sect to propose marriage at this time. To put it bluntly, they were making fun of the Floating Snow House. They had calculated that the strength of the Floating Snow House was inferior to the Heavenly Emperor Eight Gates. Therefore, they had not concealed their actions. When Yangainen saw that Lei Ming had taken the initiative to step out, it was exactly what he wanted. He walked over and helped to speak. Lord Murong, regardless, something happened to them at the territory of the Floating Snow House. The cause was also caused by the Floating Snow House. Since Suzerain Lei proposed to go down and take a look, he is not doing anything unfavorable to the Floating Snow House. Why not do us a favor? Mu Rong Qianji held a firm stance, as he only shook his head. Suzerain Yin, this is the rule left by our ancestors. I would not dare break it. Please do not mention this matter again. When Lei Ming saw that Mu Rong Qianji was also acting pretentious before him, he could not but help to feel annoyed inwardly. The whereabouts of his most prized disciple was unknown. The supreme Dao weapon was lost, plus the Qin clan was acting proud before them. All of these had deeply angered Lei Ming. Now, since Mu Rong Qianji was not being tactful, how could he swallow this anger? He opened his eyes widely and said coldly, Lord Mu Rong, if I insist on going down, what about it? This time, Mu Rong Qianji and his brothers held the same stance. All of them said loudly, Suzerain Lei, please conduct yourself with dignity. With His Highness here, he will be the witness of the entire matter. Suzerain Lei broke the rules privately and wanted to barge into the forbidden area of the Floating Snow House. It seems unreasonable, right? Lei Ming said with a cold sneer. Mu Rong Qianji, it would have been better if you did not mention this matter. Now that you have mentioned it, how come I feel that this is a conspiracy arranged by the Floating Snow House and the Qin clan? You have worked together to scheme against the Sound of Thunder sect and the Heavenly Punishing Villa, right? Or else, how could the four of them not defeat a kid from the human countries? There must be something strange inside this Black Dead Sea. If you do not allow me to investigate, it is a sign of your guilty conscience. A huge hat was placed directly on his head. Suddenly, Qin Yunran mocked him. Lei Ming, you are finally willing to admit that the four of you colluded beforehand, right? What do you mean by four of you cannot defeat one? You have given yourself away, right? You can no longer hide your fox's tail, right? 4 against 1. Ha ha. And you still dare to say that you are not colluding with each other beforehand? At this moment, Lei Ming was too lazy to bicker with Qin Yunran as he said with a cold sneer, Madman Ran, don't be so proud. Even if the 4 of us colluded with each other, the relationship between the Qin clan and the floating snow house is not clean. Or else, how could old man Mu Rong, who raised a daughter, go behind her fiancé's back and steal another man? The adultery inside must have been planned beforehand. When these words came out from Lei Ming's mouth, even Xian Wuji was stunned when he heard it. Was this Lei Ming still the leader of sect? How come he was showing such a scoundrel face? This was no different than a shrew cursing on the street. He was even more vicious. When Murong Su heard these words, his initial mood, due to Qin Wushuang's safe return, had instantly sunk to the bottom of the valley. His expression changed drastically, and he felt incredibly wronged inwardly. Yet, he bit his lips lightly to prevent himself from crying. Qin Wushuang looked at Lei Ming coldly. Old man Lei, after all, you are a grandmaster figure. Did you not wash your mouth? Why is it so smelly? Although Mu Rong Qianji was furious to the extreme, in the end, he would not dare to become hostile with the Sound of Thunder sect. However, this grudge had been formed. Mu Rong Qianji argued with reason. Head Lei, you said that the 2 of us colluded to scheme against the 4 of them. Don't you think this logic is ridiculous? Could it be that I, Mu Rong Qianji, am an immortal? How could I have known beforehand that those 4 young men would suddenly come to the floating snow house to propose marriage? If we did not know that they would come, how could we talk about any conspiracy? If you want to vent your anger on the floating snow house, you can just open your mouth. Why do you have to look for those groundless things? After he had finished speaking, Mu Rong Qianji gave a deep bow to Xian Wuji and said, Your Highness, please make the decision for the floating snow house. The floating snow house had invited people of the Heavenly Emperor Gate to act as a witness to get rid of the floating snow house. If this Sound of Thunder sect continued to tangle with them, it would be a public challenge to the authority of the Heavenly Emperor Gate. Of course, Xian Wuji understood this point. He shot a glance at Lei Ming and said lightly, Head Lei, since this is the forbidden area of the floating snow house, of course you are not allowed to enter without permission. It's also against the rules. Lei Ming still said with resentment, I am only worried that the floating snow house colluded with the Qin clan to scheme against the Sound of Thunder sect and the Heavenly Punishing Villa. Clearly, these words did not hold water. Qin Yunran said with ridicule, Lei Ming, not to mention that the Qin clan did not have any connection with the floating snow house. Even if they did, it's you who sent yourselves to our door. Disciples of the Qin clan came to the floating snow house to propose marriage. Why did your disciples come to join in the fun? Didn't you come to disgust people? In the end, you did not disgust others, but ended up losing your little life. What is this called? This is called lifting a rock and smashing your own feet. You think you're smart. Angered by Qin Yunran's words, Lei Ming could not do anything even if he blew his nose and glared at him. He was speaking the truth. They came to their door themselves. Although Yan Guinan was furious, he was not as impulsive as Lei Ming. Inwardly, he calculated for a moment and knew that today's matter was already a complete failure. If he continued to get entangled, besides making a spectacle of himself, it would be impossible for a major turnaround. Although he felt extremely unbalanced inwardly, he was helpless. He could only take a step back for now. Instantly, he said to Xian Wuji, Your Highness, this time, the Heavenly Punishing Villa admits defeat. However, since it's related to the Supreme Tao weapon, the Heavenly Punishing Villa will not let it go. For sure, Your Highness will approve it. The Heavenly Punishing Villa will compete with the Qin clan again. Qin Yunran said with a cold sneer, What's the point of competing? Even if we agree, junior brother Mu Rong will not. Yin Guinan said coldly. The next competition will have nothing to do with the floating snow house. Qin Wushuang, do you have the guts to accept the challenge? Qin Wushuang did not expect that this Yin Guinan would be this shameless as he issued another challenge to him. Suzerain Yin, if it's a disciple of the younger generation of your heavenly punishing villa, of course I will keep you company. However, if it's you, it's better for the second chief to serve you. Qin Yunran laughed. That's right, Yin Guinan. The young people have already competed. How about us two old guys also use this rare opportunity to practice? Yin Guinan rolled his eyes. Madman ran. It seems that you want to provoke the final battle in advance. The Qin clan, the heavenly punishing villa, and the Sound of Thunder sect were all well aware of the situation. Between the three of them, sooner or later there would be a life and death battle. The result of this great battle would also be the destruction of one party and the rise of the other. Regardless of which party, they were fully aware of this situation. Therefore, to Yin Guinan's threat, Qin Yunran did not have an excessive reaction. On the contrary, Qin Wushuang felt apprehensive inwardly. If the matter with Qin Wushuang were to trigger a conflict between the two sides, it would not be something he wished to see. To be continued, if you want to know the future, please log on to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 610. Qin Yunran raised his eyebrow and revealed some disdain. He laughed proudly. Decisive battle? Just your two houses are worthy to fight a decisive battle with my Qin clan? Although my Qin clan is at a low point, we are not on par with your two jumping clowns. Yin Guinan, how do you want to compete? Tell me. Before Qin Yunran, Yin Guinan would not dare to act too presumptuous. If Qin Yunran were to fight him alone, Yin Guinan knew that he would lose for sure. At the moment, he avoided the important points and dwelled on the trivial ones. Madman ran. There will be plenty of opportunities for us old guys to compete. This Qin Wushuang killed my disciple and took away the supreme Tao weapon, yet I will not allow him to take it. I will send another disciple to compete with him. Madman ran. Would you dare to take it? Although Qin Yunran had a straightforward personality, he was not a person that was blindly optimistic. He knew that the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect still had a few exceptional disciples. Although Qin Wushuang was brimming with talent, he was still young. He had not stepped onto the path of martial arts for a long time and did not have enough maturity. He said with a cold sneer, Yin Guinan, hearing your tone, it seems that the disciples of the Qin clan must compete with you? Do you think that each of the disciples of the Qin clan have the time like you? You want to take back the supreme Tao weapon? All right, let's talk about it when we're interested to compete with you. Your Highness, in this world, there is no reason to force people to compete, right? Qin Yunran asked with a chuckle. Xi and Wuji knew that this Qin Yunran was using his identity as the Highness of the Heavenly Emperor Mountain to squeeze the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect. However, under such circumstances, he could not be biased. He could only nod. For this martial arts competition, of course both parties are willing. Of course, your three houses have always been entangled with grudges. There are endless methods both on and off the stage. It's not necessary to compete on the stage to determine the victor. Vividly, these words contain some instigating intention. Of course, Qin Yunran could hear it. However, he did not expose it as he chuckled. Did you hear that? Your Highness' words are clear. For the martial arts competition, both parties must be willing. Of course, if you have any underhanded moves off the stage, just use them. In any case, after so many years, you're already very familiar with the way, aren't you? Yin Guinan was not a kind person. It was not that he did not know that there were underhanded tricks under the stage, but the key point was this Qin Wushuang had gained an advantage, so he would definitely hide in the depths of the aspiring throne mountain and not come out. To snatch back the supreme Tao weapon from his hands was simply not realistic. Besides, when this Qin Wushuang returned to the aspiring throne mountain, certainly he would hand over the supreme Tao weapon. When it is in the hands of those higher-ups of the Qin clan, it would be a fool's dream to get it back. Therefore, he could only use this kind of provocation to make Qin Wushuang and the others agree first. If they accepted the challenge in front of His Highness, they would not be able to refuse. Unexpectedly, this young and old Qin pair were equally mischievous and did not fall for his tricks. This made Yin Guinan feel somewhat defeated. When Lei Ming saw that Yin Guinan was speechless, he said loudly, "Madman Ran, just tell us if you have the guts or not. What's the point of speaking those useless words?" Qin Yunran was a master that would not be moved by force or persuasion. The more Lei Ming flew into a rage, the more he found it interesting. He said as if he was teasing him, "Old man Lei, are you threatening me or begging me?" "Begging you my ass," Lei Ming said with disdain. "One day, your Qin clan will kneel before us and beg for forgiveness." "Madman Ran, just you wait." "Beg my ass. Unfortunately, for an idiot like you, I am too lazy to even give you a fart." After Qin Yunran finished speaking, he turned to Mu Rong Qianji leisurely and said with a smile, "Lord Mu Rong, the matter between Wu Shuang and your daughter should be settled like this, right? Rather than being exposed to the wind and the sun, why don't we return to the main hall of the floating snow house and discuss it? We can set a good day, how about it?" Mu Rong Qianji had once said that as long as one of the 5 young people won, they would be qualified. Now, only Qin Wushuang had made it out alive. Naturally, it would not be appropriate for him to decline this marriage. Mu Rong Qianhuan and Mu Rong Qianshan had also agreed to do it this way. At this moment, being the leader of a sect, of course they could not go back on their words. For the time being, despite feeling somewhat unwilling, they did not know how to refute. Before an elite warrior of the Supreme Tao, like Qin Yunran, they would not dare to refute anything. Mu Rong Qianji wanted to use this opportunity to step down as he said, "In this case, let's return to the floating snow house first. Your Highness, what do you think?" Xi and Wuji had been thinking about some matters. Upon hearing Mu Rong Qianji's question, of course he would not object. He said to Lei Ming and Yin Guinan, "Two chiefs, in the competition in gambling, there are winners and losers. Don't be too attached to winning or losing." Inwardly, both Yin Guinan and Lei Ming shivered inwardly. They knew that Xi and Wuji was beating them to not act rashly. At least, they should not act rashly at the floating snow house. If they were to bully the floating snow house excessively, they could only drive the floating snow house to the Qin clan. Regardless, even if they could not stop this marriage, they must think of ways to destroy it. Now, Yin Guinan was already pondering on how to destroy this marriage. When they returned to the floating snow house, Mu Rong Qianji set up a banquet. Naturally, Lei Ming and Yin Guinan were not in the mood to attend. Most likely they would not be able to enjoy the delicacies of the land and sea, dragon liver and phoenix marrow. The 100-Sword sect and the venerable house of Vase Mound had already left in a fit of anger. Judging from their expression when they left, they did not hold much objection to the floating snow house. Inwardly, they were full of complaints to the Sound of Thunder sect and the heavenly punishing villa who had invited them. Only, they could not act out due to their power. Most likely, it would not be easy for the Sound of Thunder sect and the heavenly punishing villa to incite them to step out. After Yin Guinan and Lei Ming left in a fit of anger, Xi and Wuji also returned to the Heavenly Emperor Gate after drinking a round of wine. With Xi and Wuji's departure, it meant that this farce had come to an end. On the other hand, Qin Yunran did not mind. It was obvious that the departure of those few people who made him lose his appetite made him feel even more comfortable. He said to Mu Rong Qianji, "Brother Mu Rong, we, the older generation, should not get involved in the matters of the young people. Come. If the floating snow house still recognizes the Qin clan as their in-laws, let's drink." Honestly speaking, in terms of strength of character, the Heavenly Emperor Qin clan was unquestionably number 1 among the Heavenly Emperor 8 gates. Most likely the current Heavenly Emperor Xian clan did not have the foundation of the Qin clan. For this point, Mu Rong Qianji had always admired them. However, such admiration was only due to his personal taste and style. If one were to consider the benefit of the entire floating snow house, it would not be a wise choice to form a marriage alliance with the Qin clan now. However, after such exaggeration and disturbance, this marriage had already invited the Heavenly Emperor Gate to testify. Even if this marriage was confirmed in the future, it would be difficult for the Heavenly Punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect to find an excuse to cause trouble for the floating snow house. After all, for this marriage, Qin Wushuang had won it by defeating the competitors of the two houses. If they were to blame someone, they could only blame their own people for not having the skills. Mu Rong Qianji raised his cup and looked at Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others. Although Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others still held some grudges, they were all figures at the Grandmaster level. Naturally, they could not speak of regret. They all raised their cups and drank. However, besides Mu Rong Qianji, the other three revealed a profound expression and did not have many smiles. Clearly, inwardly, they still held 1,000 unwillingness. Of course, Qin Yunran knew the thoughts of these people. However, he was a casual person. If it were not for the fact that he was opposing his enemies, he would almost not care about these little details. Therefore, he only let it go with a smile. In terms of the prejudice of the secular world, the aspiring Throne Mountain Qin clan was indeed at a low point. Being attacked by two major powerhouses, it was reasonable for people to not think highly of them. However, Qin Yunran did not plan to argue. As for who was strong and who was weak, time would prove everything. Qin Wushuang took all of this into his eyes. Yet, it was difficult for him to act as calm and collected as Qin Yunran. After all, when these three guys showed their displeasure to them, Murong Su was the one who felt the most uncomfortable. For a girl, which girl would not want her fiancé to live in harmony with her family? Who would not want to receive their family's blessings and not the cold eyes? Thinking here, Qin Wushuang glanced around and said to Mu Rong Qianji, "Lord Mu Rong, could you please dismiss all the servants for now?" There was some astonishment in Mu Rong Qianji's eyes. However, he still had a favorable impression of Qin Wushuang. Putting aside the identity of the Qin clan, just Qin Wushuang alone made Mu Rong Qianji feel indescribable joy and admiration. He also knew that Qin Wushuang was a good match for his daughter. He was at least 100 times better than that Luo Ting. He waved his hand and instructed with an indifferent tone, "You can all leave. Without my order, do not come in." After the servants had left, Qin Yunran poured himself a cup of wine and drank by himself. Then, he said with a smile, "Wushuang, I guess you should have gained something else from the Black Dead Sea, right?" As soon as he said these words, instantly, some astonished lights emerged from Mu Rong Qianji's eyes. Qin Wushuang nodded with a calm smile. "A moment ago, there were too many eyes and ears. I had deliberately concealed many things. Please take a look, Lord Mu Rong." As he spoke, Qin Wushuang took out the two giant eggs of the phantom dragon from his storage ring as if he was performing a magic trick. He spread them on his palm, and they emitted a bewitching and strange light. This, Mu Rong Qianji could not help but slightly bow. He took a step forward and leaned forward to look. The other three also revealed a surprised expression. "Egg of the phantom dragon?" Mu Rong Qianhuan asked with a stutter. Qin Yunran had the strongest spiritual perception as he said with a smile, "That's right. Indeed, life is being nurtured inside these giant eggs. Also, it is the bloodline of an extremely ancient demonic beast. Wushuang, good kid, you can keep your composure." Qin Wushuang said with a smile, "One must always guard against others. When I was in the Black Dead Sea, I had used their greed to kill Hu Qiulan and Lei Jiao. Only then could I concentrate on dealing with Yin Zhuiyang. Or else, if the four of them had swarmed me, I would not have been able to fight against them with 3 fists. I am afraid I would not have been able to resist them." At the moment, he used the writing technique of Confucius to cut off the things he should not say and said everything he could. After he finished, he said, "I am worried that since the bloodline of the Phantom Dragon is extremely precious, the Sound of Thunder sect and the Heavenly Punishing Villa would covet it and bring unnecessary trouble to the floating snow house. Therefore, I had deliberately concealed it from them. When he said these words, Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others felt more or less ashamed. They thought about how they treated Qin Wushuang with a vile attitude, and how Qin Wushuang had always thought for the floating snow house. In comparison, these old guys were not as open and bright as a young man. This way, their hostility to Qin Wushuang had instantly been reduced. Instead, they had a few more favorable impressions of him. After all, if Qin Wushuang wanted to take it for himself, they would have no way to know. Even if Qin Wushuang wanted to offer it to curry favor with Murong Su, he could have offered it before Xian Wuji. With the son of the heavenly emperor as a witness, of course the effect would be different. However, Qin Wushuang did not do this. Without a doubt, he did not want to bring unnecessary trouble to the floating snow house because of his own selfishness. Murong Qianji felt something inwardly as he said, "Three little brothers, since Wushuang has such intentions, if the floating snow house continues to be disrespectful to him, then we do not know what's good for us. Only the four of us know about the egg of the phantom dragon. Let's not spread it to the outside world for now. You should know the importance of this matter." Murong Qianhuan and the other two all nodded seriously. This was not a joke. The bloodline of the immemorial phantom dragon was definitely a bloodline of the supreme Tao. Many people would go crazy for it. Once the secret was exposed, the floating snow house would never have a day of peace. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chidian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 611. Don't look at how Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others were extremely awkward when dealing with Qin Wushuang. However, when it involved the life and death of the floating snow house, they were extremely concerned. The bloodline of the immemorial phantom dragon was related to the life and death of the floating snow house. It was definitely not a joke. Suddenly, Mu Rong Qianhuan thought of a problem. Brother, Wushuang said that the immemorial phantom dragon is already dead. Then how should we hatch these two eggs? This question was rather practical. Mu Rong Qianji said with a low voice, "This is a problem. Do you have any good ideas?" Everyone knew very little about the immemorial phantom dragon. In fact, it was definitely an unexpected surprise for Qin Wushuang to give them the eggs. They did not even think about it this much. Therefore, for the time being, everyone looked at each other in dismay and could not answer. When Mu Rong Qianji saw everyone's expression, he knew that they did not have any ideas. He could not refrain from turning around to ask Qin Yunran, "Brother Yunran, the Qin clan is also a clan with immemorial inheritance. Certainly, they know more about the bloodline of the immemorial phantom dragon than us. May I ask if you have any good suggestions?" Qin Yunran laughed. "This is simple. Look at these two eggs. Clearly they're on the verge of hatching. You only need to find a dragon beast with a relatively pure bloodline of the dragon clan, and you can hatch it." A relatively pure dragon beast? Then spiritual beasts like the python should not work, right? Mu Rong Qianji asked. Certainly it will not work. At most, the python and the dragon clan can only be considered as having the same origin. They're not connected by blood. It must be from the dragon clan and must be close to the supreme Tao stage. Of course, it would be best if it is from the supreme Tao stage. Qin Yunran's words instantly caused the mood of the four leaders of the floating snow house to become complicated. The headquarters of the dragon clan was at the endless eastern sea. Even if the Xian Yuan mound had the bloodline of the dragon clan, it would be extremely rare. They would not know where to find it. Most importantly, it must have strength close to the supreme Tao stage. This would be even more difficult to find. Dragon clan? When Qin Wushuang heard this news, he was moved inwardly. He remembered that inside his sealed scroll, the strongest spiritual beast was the dragon beast of the dragon clan. Swallowing Sky Lion Dragon. Lion Dragon was the son of the dragon. It was a very pure dragon bloodline. Murong Su had been silently listening from the side. However, her gaze had never left her lover. Thus, when she saw Qin Wushuang's expression change slightly, she could not help but ask, "Big brother Qin, do you have any ideas?" Murong Su wanted Qin Wushuang to perform well in front of the upper echelons of the floating snow house. Qin Wushuang did not hide anything. He nodded and asked Qin Yunran, second chief, "Is Swan Xiao considered a pure-blooded dragon?" Qin Yunran was stunned. He smiled and said, "Momo, of course not." Among the dragon clan, there were two purest bloodlines. They were the true Dragon 9 clans and the non-true Dragon 9 clans. This Taowu was a bloodline of the non-9 dragon clans. Naturally, it was very pure. It could be said to be the purest breed of the dragon clan. It's much purer than those hybrid dragons. "Oh," Qin Wushuang muttered to himself and asked curiously, "Second chief, what are the true 9 dragon clans and what are the non-9 dragon clans? Have you heard of the saying that the dragon has 9 sons and each son is different?" Qin Wushuang nodded. "I have heard of this." In fact, Qin Wushuang had such saying in his former world. He didn't expect that this Tianxian land also had such a saying. It seemed that this Tianxian land and the world of his former world were not completely unrelated. Perhaps this Tianxian land and his former world were on the same plane in a different time and space. Of course, Qin Wushuang did not plan to consider this question. He was more curious about the bloodline of the dragon clan. Qin Yunran said with great familiarity, "The so-called true 9 dragon clans refers to the coiled dragon, flood dragon, hornless dragon, horn dragon, winged dragon, mirage dragon, koei dragon, hui dragon, and chelated dragon. The appearance and characteristics of these true 9 dragon clans all inherited the traditional characteristics of the dragon clan. In fact, the non-9 dragon clans are also the offspring of the dragon clan. However, their appearance and characteristics are contrary to the traditions of the dragon clan. The so-called non-9 dragon clans refers to the non-dragon in terms of appearance and temperament, and the non-dragon bloodline. Therefore, the true 9 dragon clans and the non-9 dragon clans are all dragon clans. It's just to make it easier to distinguish." Qin Wushuang was enlightened. "This way, the Swan and I is one of the non-9 dragon clans?" "Yes, the non-9 dragon clans are Chionyo, Yizi, Chaofeng, Pulao, Swan and I, Taotai, Swan and I, and Chiwen." Qin Yunran's words had not only swept away Qin Wushuang's blindness, it had also fascinated the 4 major leaders of the floating snow house. Although the floating snow house was a tyrannical powerhouse in the Xian Yuan Mound, regardless of vision or foundation, compared to the heavenly Emperor Qin clan, there was a difference between heaven and earth. Qin Yunran knew these stories passed down from the immemorial times like the back of his hand. For them, it was their first time to have such a clear understanding. Therefore, their earlier conflict towards the Qin clan had gradually turned into envy. This was the foundation a major powerhouse should have. Second chief, then the true 9 dragon clans and the non-9 dragon clans should be the strongest existences in the endless Eastern Sea, right? Qin Yunran said with a smile. It's equivalent to the position of the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates in the Xian Yuan Mound. When the people of the floating snow house heard this, they could not but help to feel somewhat disappointed. Since the true 9 dragon clans and the non-9 dragon clans held such a high position at the endless Eastern Sea, how could the floating snow house ask for it? However, Qin Yunran asked, "Wushuang, earlier you only asked about the Swan and I. Could it be you know the dragon beast of the Swan and I clan?" Qin Wushuang did not conceal it. "Indeed, I know a Swan and I dragon beast. Only, I cannot make contact with him for now. I can only make contact with him when the time is right." Qin Yunran laughed meaningfully. "That's good. Junior brother Murong. For this matter, you can discuss it with your son-in-law. Ha ha." Murong Qianji smiled apologetically and said to Qin Wushuang, "Wushuang, how is your relationship with that Swan and I dragon?" Qin Wushuang thought for a moment and answered, "We have a good relationship. I just don't know whether that Swan and I dragon is a male or a female, and whether it can hatch the dragon eggs." This was Qin Wushuang's faint concern. Unexpectedly, after Qin Yunran heard these words, he roared with laughter. "Wushuang, it seems you still don't understand the dragon clan. When the dragon clan incubates the dragon eggs, it doesn't matter if it's a male or female. As long as it's the dragon chi of the dragon clan that catalyzes the incubation. The key is the bloodline and dragon chi of the dragon clan. It doesn't matter if it's a male or female. When Murong Su heard this, she could not refrain from laughing as she smiled. A moment ago, she was also vaguely worried about this problem. Only, she did not speak of it. Qin Wushuang chuckled, for he knew that he had made a big mistake. However, the people of the floating snow house were feeling complicated, especially Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others. They were even more worried about personal gains and losses. They were all pondering whether this Qin Wushuang would care about how they had made things difficult for him and refused to give face to the floating snow house. After all, if finding the bloodline of the demonic dragon could be seen as a mission assigned by Qin Wushuang, he had no choice but to do it for the sake of Murong Su. Then, this incubation would have nothing to do with Qin Wushuang, and it would not be his responsibility. Therefore, the gazes of Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others were all focused on Qin Wushuang. Clearly, they wanted to see what Qin Wushuang was thinking. Murong Su gently pushed Qin Wushuang. Clearly, she was reminding him that with such a good opportunity to perform, Qin Wushuang must seize it. Brother Qin, father is looking at you. Murong Su whispered into Qin Wushuang's ear. Although her voice was as soft as a mosquito, everyone at the scene was an expert. Clearly, they all heard it. However, they only smiled and did not speak. Mu Rong Qinji laughed. Wushuang, how about this? The matter between you and Su Air has gone through many twists and turns. Now, no one has any objections. When he said this, Mu Rong Qinji deliberately stopped and looked at Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others. Earlier, Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others had strongly opposed this marriage. However, after this series of unforeseen events, the relationship between Qin Wushuang and Murong Su had been witnessed by Xian Wuji, the Heavenly Emperor Gate. They no longer had any excuse to object. Not to mention, the situation had changed. They were the ones who needed Qin Wushuang's help. Mu Rong Qianhuan gave a long sigh with shame. Brother, previously, us brothers were too calculative about these gains and losses. Now, regarding the matter between Wushuang and Su Air, of course we have no reason to object. From now on, everyone is a family. Brother, don't worry about us singing a different tune. Our starting point is for the good of the floating snow house. We are not deliberately making things difficult for these young people. Since Wushuang has withstood all those tests, it proves that he is qualified to become the son-in-law of the floating snow house. Since the general situation is set, of course we will support it with all our strength. Indeed, these three guys did not hold a personal grudge against Qin Wushuang. They were only somewhat snobbish. However, they still had a view of the general situation. Since Qin Wushuang and Murong Su were already set in stone, if they were to sing a different tune, not only would it not help the situation, it would also destroy the general situation of the floating snow house. After all, they had already offended the heavenly punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect. If they did not build a good relationship with the Qin clan, the future of the floating snow house would be even more difficult. Regardless of emotion or reason, they could not go against Qin Wushuang. Upon hearing the words of Mu Rong Qianhuan, Mu Rong Qianshan also nodded. Brother, Su Air, and nephew Wushuang, my tone was also somewhat inappropriate in the past. In the future, everyone will be a family. Please forgive me. When Murong Su heard the words of her family, she was secretly pleased. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang revealed a light smile. Initially, he did not care about this matter. He had fought for the sake of Murong Su. When he saw that Murong Su was happy, of course he would not cause any more trouble. Everyone is an elder. Regardless of the severity of your tone, in the end, you do not hold any ill intentions. I will not take it to heart. Hearing his words, Mu Rong Qianji also admired Wushuang's demeanor. He said again, since this marriage is set, I will decide. Then I will make the decision. Wushuang, if you can help to hatch these two phantom dragon bloodlines, one of them will be your and Su Air's dowry. Brothers, what do you think? The hearts of Mu Rong, Qian Huan, and the others tightened. To be honest, they were somewhat surprised. However, after some consideration, with their methods and connections, most likely they would never be able to find a dragon beast to hatch these 2 dragon eggs. Additionally, if they gave it to Murong Su, it would be fair and reasonable to keep the goodies within the family. After all, they had put in the effort. Brother, this is a good thing. If Wu Shuang can hatch this phantom dragon bloodline, he deserves this reward. I have no objection. Seeing Mu Rong Qianhuan's attitude, naturally the other 2 could not object as they all nodded in agreement. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chidian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 612. Since the 4 major leaders of the Floating Snow House had expressed their stance, of course Qin Wushuang could not refuse. Not to mention, he also had some thoughts about the eggs of the Phantom Dragon. He felt that it would definitely be a good thing if he could acquire the bloodline of the Phantom Dragon. Instantly, he said, I will do my best. At this moment, Murong Qianshan began to flatter Qin Wushuang. Wushuang, since you stepped onto the path of martial arts, you have done so many world-shaking things. I believe that you can also take care of this matter easily. Of course, Qin Wushuang knew what Murong Qianshan meant, yet he did not expose him. It shouldn't be a big problem. Only, I cannot contact the dragon for now. Once I do, it will surely sell this favor to me. Qin Wushuang was not bragging, but he had the certainty. That swallowing sky lion dragon was the spiritual beast sealed in his scroll. It was under his control, and there was no reason for it not to listen to his orders. Murong Qianji and the others knew that Qin Wushuang was not someone who spoke without thinking. Inwardly, they were overjoyed. Wushuang, I will have to trouble you for this matter. Murong Qianji was incredibly moved. If they possessed the bloodline of the Phantom Dragon, without a doubt, the status of the Floating Snow House would rise to another level. The immemorial bloodline was the bloodline of the Supreme Tao. Clearly, these 2 dragon eggs were not the kind that had been passed down for a few hundred generations, but the 2nd generation of the Phantom Dragon. Such inherited bloodline that did not skip generations would definitely be extremely pure. Once it hatched, would definitely be a Supreme Tao bloodline. In time, the Floating Snow House would have a Supreme Tao spiritual beast to oversee it. In the Xianyuan Mound, it would be extremely eye-catching. Even the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates rarely had a Supreme Tao spiritual beast to oversee it. In the Xianyuan Mound, although there were many Supreme Tao elite warriors, Supreme Tao spiritual beasts were extremely rare. It was completely different from the Heavenly Fire southern border and the Endless Eastern Sea. Thinking that the Floating Snow House would most likely have a Supreme Tao spiritual beast to oversee it, Murong Qianhuan and the others were also secretly overjoyed. They were well aware of the importance of a Supreme Tao spiritual beast to the Floating Snow House. With a Supreme Tao elite warrior, it meant they could become a first-rate powerhouse. If Mu Rong Qianji could enter the Supreme Tao stage in his lifetime, plus the Supreme Tao Dragon Beast, in the future, the Floating Snow House would have great hope to enter the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates. Currently, the majority of the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates only had 2 Supreme Tao elite warriors. Suddenly, Qin Yunran laughed. Wushuang, for this matter, you must take care of it quickly. In a place like the Xianyuan Mound, a Supreme Tao spiritual beast is definitely extraordinary. Disciple will do his best. Qin Wushuang did not hesitate. Qin Yunran nodded and asked as if he didn't care, Wushuang, the sound of thunder sect and the heavenly punishing villa hate you to the bone. You must be on your guard. Even if they weren't thinking about revenge, they were still thinking about the Supreme Tao weapon. Haha, Yin Guinan has always been a shrewd schemer. This time, he failed miserably at such an easy task. He must be feeling extremely aggrieved. He had schemed against Qin Wushuang, but in the end, he was schemed against by Qin Wushuang. He was dead, and the Supreme Tao weapon was lost. to the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect. This time they went for wool and came home shorn. Suddenly, Qin Wushuang remembered the supreme Dao weapon and took out the two supreme Dao weapons. Second chief, these two supreme Dao weapons were seized from Yin Jueyang and Lei Jiao. Qin Yunran waved his hand. You can keep this for yourself. The Qin clan did not give you a supreme Dao weapon, and we will not covet your supreme Dao weapon. For such things, the Qin clan has always paid particular attention to fortune. If a disciple of the Qin clan acquired it, unless they do not have enough fortune, they would not need to confiscate it. The Qin clan was a clan inherited from the immemorial period. Compared to the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect, they did have some supreme Dao weapons. The combined supreme Dao weapons of the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect would most likely not surpass the Qin clan. Therefore, the Qin clan would not covet the supreme Dao weapons. Additionally, in the end, weapons were dead. In the end, the competition of the strength of a sect still depended on the number of supreme Dao elite warriors and the number of people with the potential to become supreme Dao elite warriors. As for the supreme Dao weapons, they were the icing on the cake. Of course, to elite warriors beneath the supreme Dao stage, the effect of the supreme Dao weapons was apparent. For elite warriors of the same level, one would have a supreme Dao weapon and the other would not. Then certainly the battle between these two would be one-sided. The supreme Dao weapons would definitely allow elite warriors beneath the supreme Dao to have the power to instantly kill elite warriors of the same level. Just when Qin Wushuang was about to speak, suddenly Qin Yunran asked with a faint smile, Wushuang, this time you have come to propose marriage. Have you prepared any betrothal gifts? Qin Wushuang was stunned. How come the second chief had suddenly brought up the topic of betrothal gifts? From the corner of his eyes, he glimpsed the red clouds flying across Murong Su's face. Suddenly, he realized something and laughed. Although this second chief was said to be crazy, his mind was more meticulous than anyone else. Wasn't he reminding him that Qin Wushuang was using the supreme Dao weapons to present the Buddha with borrowed flowers? Mu Rong Qianji and the others were all experienced people. Upon hearing Qin Yunran's words, inwardly, they felt apprehensive and their eyes became somewhat unnatural. Although the Qin clan did not lack supreme Dao weapons, it did not mean the floating snow house did not lack them. In fact, not only did the floating snow house lack them, they did not have them at all. For your information, initially the heavenly Luo Daoist sect had almost knelt down to beg the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect for a supreme Dao weapon. Among the second-rate powerhouses, rarely did they possess a supreme Dao weapon. Therefore, upon hearing Qin Yunran's hint, on one hand, they felt the sincerity of the Qin clan. On the other hand, they were worried about personal gains and losses. They thought, would this Qin Wushuang offer them a supreme Dao weapon? Qin Wushuang held the supreme Dao battle blade in his hand and walked before Mu Rong Qianji. Senior Mu Rong, I acquired this supreme Dao battle blade from Yin Jueyang. It possesses astonishing attack power. If you don't mind, please take it as a small gift from me to present the Buddha with borrowed flowers. Please accept it. Indeed, Mu Rong Qianji loved this battle blade greatly. However, his rationality told him that this gift seemed somewhat excessive. For the time, he was somewhat hesitant. Qin Yunran laughed. Junior brother Mu Rong, it's rare for a young man to show such filial piety. If you don't accept it, wouldn't it be embarrassing for him before your daughter? Upon hearing Qin Yunran's words, Mu Rong Qianhuan and the others also advised him. Yes, senior brother, it would be impolite to refuse Wushuang's kind intentions. Senior brother, take it. We are all family. Don't regard us as outsiders. Inwardly, Mu Rong Qianji was willing to accept it 1,000 times. Upon hearing everyone's advice, he had a way out as he nodded. Wushuang, thank you so much. Qin Wushuang laughed. The heavenly punishing villa should be the one thanking. If they had not sent these supreme Dao weapons from thousands of miles away, where would we have found them? Everyone laughed. At this moment, Mu Rong, Qianhuan, and the others had completely forgotten their previous unhappiness. They liked this future son-in-law of the floating snow house even more. Regardless, this Qin Wushuang was indeed understanding. Compared to Luo Ting of the heavenly Luo Taoist sect, he was many times more open-minded. When comparing the two, they felt that perhaps, to the floating snow house, Morong Su marrying this Qin Wushuang would be a major turning point. If the Qin clan were to defeat the heavenly punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect one day, the floating snow house could fight for the spot left vacant by the heavenly Emperor Eight Gates. Thinking here, unconsciously, the scales in their hearts were already leaning toward the Qin clan. When Murong Su saw Qin Wushuang acting with magnanimity and propriety, she was secretly overjoyed. Her face was filled with a happy smile. This was the scene she was most willing to see. Her beloved had been accepted and acknowledged by the higher-ups of the family. They were even proud of it. Nothing would make Murong Su feel more gratified than this. Qin Yunran said, "Junior brother Murong, this battle blade is one of the most tyrannical weapons among the Supreme Tao weapons. Before you enter the Supreme Tao stage, it's best to not reveal it to avoid attracting the attention of the heavenly punishing Villa." Murong Qinji nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance." "Aha, don't mention it. The Qin clan also has some insights in terms of comprehending the Supreme Tao stage. If you're free, you could be a guest at the aspiring throne mountain. In terms of comprehending the Supreme Tao stage, perhaps it can provide you with some experience." Murong Qinji was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. Receiving such promise made him feel more excited than having a Supreme Tao weapon. After all, a Supreme Tao weapon was only a weapon. If he could enter the Supreme Tao stage, then the floating snow house would soar. Combined with the Supreme Tao weapon, even if the heavenly punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect wanted to cause trouble, they would have to think twice. With this exchange, the relationship between the Qin clan and the floating snow house immediately entered a honeymoon period. They were no longer estranged from each other. In fact, they had already reached a tacit understanding. Murong Qinji laughed. "Wushuang, your parents are in the human countries. If you have time, you can come to the Xian Yuan Mound and get to know them. When the time is ripe, you will also need to discuss your marriage with Su Er." Qin Wushuang nodded. "I will make a trip to the human countries." At the Tianxian land, although the sects were in charge, the orders from one's parents were still the most important. Therefore, regardless of the matter regarding Morong Su, he could not leave his father and family aside. He remembered that his sister had always urged him on this aspect. If he told them about Morong Su, surely his father and sister would be incredibly gratified. Qin Yunran nodded. "Wushuang, now you are a core disciple of the Qin clan. Your parents and family can return to recognize their ancestors and bring them to the heavenly Emperor Mountain. It will not be a problem for you to go to the ancestral home of the plain field town or settle down at the aspiring throne mountain." Qin Wushuang had also been considering this problem. Now at his level, it would not be meaningful to let his family enjoy the riches and honor of the secular world of the human countries. Additionally, the territory controlled by the Qin clan was much larger than the entire human countries. If one wanted to enjoy the riches and honor of the secular world, they would still have it at the territory of the Qin headquarters. Qin Wushuang decided to go back and ask for his family's opinion. As for returning to the plain field town, he personally did not approve of it. The plain field town was the ancestral home of the Qin clan. However, the line of Qin Yu's ancestor did not have a foundation there. In fact, if one went there, they would be considered half a guest. It would not be good for a guest to usurp the host position. Even if forefather Qin Yi had welcomed him with all his efforts, he would not be enthusiastic. After all, such distance was a fact that could not be erased. If he were to come, it would be better to stay at the aspiring throne mountain. It would also be beneficial for training. At the moment, he nodded. "Second chief, then I will return to the human countries." Murong Qinji said, "Su Er, you should go with Wushuang." "Yes." Murong Su was filled with joy from the bottom of his heart. However, in such situation, he could not show too much ecstasy. He gave a light hum, and his handsome face blushed again. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chitian.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 613. On this trip to the floating snow house, Qin Wushuang had achieved great success. At least, the results had far exceeded his expectations. He had untied the knot in Murong Su's heart that had been worrying for a long time. Initially, Murong Su thought that the higher-ups of the floating snow house would not approve of her marriage with Qin Wushuang. She was even prepared to elope with Qin Wushuang. Although this girl who was soft on the outside and tough on the inside had made the decision to cut off all means of retreat, she would be the happiest if she could use such a gentle method to solve the problem perfectly. Qin Yunran's care towards the floating snow house had also given the floating snow house a clear hint. That was to form an alliance. This had also caused these higher-ups of the floating snow house to become restless from their initial worry. On the other hand, after Qin Yunran had left with Qin Wushuang and Murong Su, the four higher-ups of the floating snow house sat inside the main hall. They looked at each other, and each of them had a lot to say. "Big brother, earlier I was too harsh with my words. Please forgive me if I have offended you." Murong Qianshan spoke first. Of course, Murong Qianji would not be so narrow-minded. Although he was protective of his shortcomings, he was not someone who did not value brotherhood. In fact, he did not consider the future of the floating snow house any less than Murong Qianshan. It was just that as a father, he couldn't push his daughter into the fire pit. He waved his hand and said lightly, "Everyone is thinking for the future of the floating snow house. Between brothers, there is no such thing as holding grudges. You know my personality. As long as you do not cross my bottom line, everything will not be a problem. Now, I would like to hear your opinion on the Qin clan." "Second, you go first." Murong Qianji looked at Murong Qianhuan and called out his name. Murong Qianhuan was not surprised when he saw his big brother call out his name first. After a moment of silence, he said, "Big brother, the outside world is spreading rumors that the Qin clan is in an embarrassing state under the pincer attack of the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect. Judging from this incident, it doesn't seem to be the case at all." Murong Qianji laughed. "How many years has the heavenly punishing villa stayed at the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates? How many years has the Sound of Thunder sect stayed at the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates? 10,000 years in total. For the Qin clan, since the immemorial period, the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates had always had the Qin clan. There is no need to elaborate on the depth of their foundation. Of course, he must admit that the Qin clan was at a low point. But I don't think it's a precarious situation. This time, it seemed that the heavenly punishing villa and the Thunder sect were indeed very powerful. However, Qin Yunran's calm and collected performance gave them a deeper impression. They felt that the Qin clan was unfathomable. On the contrary, the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect were somewhat flustered and exasperated. Although the attitude of the Heavenly Emperor Gate was extremely ambiguous, at least between the Qin clan and those two powerhouses, the Qin clan did not fall into a disadvantageous position. On the contrary, they appeared to be handling a butcher's cleaver with ease. Because of the Qin clan's ease, as if everything was within his calculations, it gave the floating snow house a powerful psychological impact. It made them feel that getting married to the Qin clan was not as hopeless as they had imagined. On the contrary, upon careful thinking, if the Qin clan was willing to help the floating snow house most likely it would be a major turning point. The position of the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates was something all the powerhouses in the Xian Yuan Mound yearned for even in their dreams. However, for these 8 positions, since ancient times, how many powerhouses were qualified to touch it? Similar to the Heavenly Luo Daoist sect, deep inside the floating snow house's heart, they were fascinated by the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates. Although Qin Yunran did not give a clear statement, the various details of inviting Murong Qianji to visit the aspiring throne mountain were in fact clear hints. If they could not understand the hints, they would not be the heads of the floating snow house. Brother, if the Qin clan is truly willing to help you upgrade to the Supreme Tao stage, I feel that it's not impossible for the floating snow house to form an alliance with the Qin clan. Yes, if the floating snow house has an elite warrior of the Supreme Tao stage, how could the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect dare to bully us brazenly like this time? Marriage proposal? I think they are clearly using the marriage proposal as an excuse to deal with the Qin clan. They are only using the floating snow house as a battlefield. Speaking of this matter, initially Mu Rong Qianshan felt that the involvement of the heavenly punishing villa and the other powerhouses would give them an excuse to refuse the Qin clan. Now, thinking carefully, Mu Rong Qianshan's attitude had changed drastically. He felt that those two powerhouses were clearly using their power to bully others. Mu Rong Qianji was not as emotional as them, as he muttered to himself irresolutely. I've decided that in a few days, I will pay a visit to the aspiring Throne Mountain and probe their intentions. Brother, go early. If you can upgrade to the Supreme Tao stage, the floating snow house will have a strong backbone. Mu Rong Qianji said with a smile. I will do my best. I also want to see who will enter the Supreme Tao stage, first compared to Luo Tongtian. Mu Rong Qianji and Luo Tongtian were publicly recognized as the most promising candidates to enter the Supreme Tao stage. Between these two, there had always existed the thought of competing in the dark. Currently, with the destruction of the mountain gate of the heavenly Luo Taoist sect, the position of the sect had plummeted. However, this did not mean that Luo Tongtian himself would also plummet. The competition between these two would still continue. Senior brother, say, this future son-in-law of yours is truly a mystery. Mu Rong Qianhuan sighed with emotion. All this time, we have collected a lot of information about him. However, he would always bring us unexpected surprises. It seems that this Qin Wushuang is truly a genius bestowed by the heavens. I see that Brother Yunran values him highly. I can see that he planned to nurture Qin Wushuang as the successor of the Qin clan. Mu Rong Qianshan chuckled. Although I opposed the matter between him and Su Er earlier, in terms of Qin Wushuang himself, I think he is truly an exceptional young man. No matter how I look at it, he is 100 times more flexible than that Luo Ting. Although there are many exceptional disciples at the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates, there are not many young people with such vigor, dominance, and shrewdness like Wushuang. I think that only Prince Xian Wuji of the Heavenly Emperor Gate is qualified to suppress Wushuang, right? Although the other young people have higher strength, I am afraid they would not be able to defeat Wushuang if they were to fight him. These were not flattery. At the Black Dead Sea, he was able to take on 4 people, and 2 of them had Supreme Tao weapons. 4 such methods and skills, even elite warriors at the exquisite mysterious boundary stage would not dare to say they would win for sure. Unless it was someone at the peak of the common mysterious stage like Mu Rong Qianji, or else they would not be able to deal with Qin Wushuang. At this moment, Mu Rong Qianhuan also exclaimed with admiration, "What makes me even more surprised is that his network extends to the Dragon Clan. I really want to know how many more secrets are hidden behind this Qin Wushuang." Mu Rong Qianji laughed leisurely. "What good would it do us to know this? I rather hope he has more secrets." Mu Rong Qianshan laughed. "That's right. The more secrets he has, the more trump cards he has. It also means that he has greater fortune. Big brother, could it be that this Qin Wushuang is truly a genius arranged by the will of the heavens to lead the Qin clan to soar? Or else, regardless of how monstrous a young man from the human countries is, his progress would be too fast. How many years has it been since he stepped onto the path of martial arts? He was able to put a major powerhouse like the heavenly Luo Taoist sect into a terrible fix." Everyone laughed. If they had only heard about it in the past, now that they had witnessed it with their own eyes, they had finally seen the extraordinary aspects of this young man. In comparison, young people like Yin Zhuiyang and Lei Jiao were like little kids before him, including Luo Ting from before. Luo Tongtian had made a big fuss over Luo Ting's death. Thinking about it now, It was not unjust that Luo Ting was killed by Qin Wushuang. Although Luo Ting had high talent and powerful strength, could he be stronger than Yin Jueyang and Lei Jiao? Even if their talent and strength were similar, Lei Jiao and Yin Jueyang both had supreme Dao weapons, and it was 4 against 1. Yes, now it seems that Luo Ting's death was not unjust. Mu Rong Qianji gave a long sigh. Brothers, now the floating snow house has acquired a fortuitous opportunity. I hope everyone will throw away those little details and prejudices and seize this opportunity. Regardless of success or failure, the floating snow house needs to take a gamble. With the future trend of the Xian Yuan Mound, it would be extremely difficult to stay out of it. Since we have this fortuitous opportunity, we should not sit and wait for death if we do not fight for it. Big brother, we will listen to you. Yes, you can decide. As long as the Qin clan is willing to form an alliance with the floating snow house, we will form an alliance. We cannot sit here and wait for the heavenly punishing villa and the sound of thunder sect to seek revenge. That's right. Besides, the Qin clan has been passed down for tens and thousands of years. Certainly they have experienced many low points. They must have had their own way of surviving since they were able to remain among the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates. I think the Qin clan must have some trump cards that the Heavenly Punishing Villa and the Sound of Thunder sect do not know about. Since they leaned toward the Qin clan, naturally they were leaning toward the Qin clan through their words. Of course, their analysis was not without reason. Since the Qin clan had been passed down for tens and thousands of years, certainly they had experienced more than one low point. However, since the Qin clan had been able to hold on and never been removed from the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates, certainly they must have some foundation. When Qin Wushuang and Murong Su returned to the aspiring throne mountain, they kept an extremely low profile. They also did not disturb others. Qin Yunran directly took him to the secluded valley where he trained. Qin Chongyang, the third chief, was already waiting there for a long time. Clearly, he had already received Qin Yunran's report of victory. He also felt incredibly excited about everything Qin Wushuang had done. Haha, third, I made you wait for a long time. Qin Chongyang laughed. Since we could wait for such inspiring good news, what's the harm in waiting for a long time? Wushuang, congratulations, you got the beauty, haha. Unexpectedly, this third chief also had a humorous side. Murong Su had seen Qin Chongyang at the Heavenly Emperor Gate. Naturally, he knew him and went up to pay their respects with Qin Wushuang. Yes, Wushuang, no need to be overly courteous. You did a beautiful job. However, don't take offense. This time, I don't plan to announce your results to the entire Qin clan. Qin Wushuang did not care about this. He had already passed the stage of caring about false reputation. This time, he returned to the aspiring throne mountain mainly because he wanted to bid farewell and return to the human countries. His family, teachers, he was extremely concerned about them. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chidian.com. More chapters, support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 614. Naturally, Qin Chongyang's intention of not notifying the outside world was to protect Qin Wushuang. Regardless, Qin Wushuang was still a newcomer. If he was in the limelight, even in the united atmosphere of the Qin clan, most likely it would cause unnecessary internal problems. After all, to allow Qin Wushuang's limelight to suppress all the young people of the aspiring Throne Mountain Qin clan, it would definitely be a great stimulus to the other core disciples. It would not matter if it was a positive stimulus. He was afraid that it would cause all kinds of negative stimuli and cause an imbalance of mentality and emotional changes. It would definitely affect the morale of the army. For this Qin Wushuang, he must slowly let the disciples of the Qin clan accept him and acknowledge his existence. He must let everyone gradually become familiar with Qin Wushuang's exceptional qualities. As time passed, imperceptibly, it would be convenient to push Qin Wushuang onto the stage and entrust him with heavy responsibilities. This was Qin Chongyang's painstaking effort for the young people. For someone as smart as Qin Wushuang, of course he could guess a thing or two. Qin Yunran laughed. Third, Wushuang is an understanding person and a straightforward person. You can tell him your intentions directly. Of course, with his intelligence, you should be able to guess it. It's right for you to protect him. However, you also know that when he truly shines, we cannot stop him even if we want to. Let nature take its course. Yes, that's what I think. For now, let Wushuang have a peaceful environment to develop. Don't attract too much attention. This time, with Xi and Wuji overseeing the situation, I am more or less worried. Worried about what? Qin Yunran asked. I am worried that Xi and Wuji will see Wushuang's limelight and potential and set Qin Wushuang as an imaginary enemy. For the other young disciples of the Heavenly Emperor Eight Gates, it would not matter. If Xi and Wuji sets his eyes on Wushuang, at least for now, it would not be a good thing. Yes, these words are reasonable. Xi and Wuji is a person with deep shrewdness. He does not show his emotions. However, upon seeing Wushuang's performance, it's possible that he has some ideas. Qin Wushuang was rather calm. Two chiefs, for now, I cannot pose any threat to Xi and Wuji. He should not have treated me as some imaginary enemy. Inwardly, Murong Su was joyful. Even if Murong Su did not have much vanity, she still felt gratified that her beloved was on par with Xi and Wuji, the publicly recognized number one of the young generation at the Heavenly Emperor Mountain. This was because she had witnessed the growth of Qin Wushuang. All right, let's not talk about this for now. With Wushuang's growth speed, in 10 or 20 years, it would not be hopeless for him to catch up to Xi and Wuji. Wushuang, in terms of foundation, the Heavenly Emperor Xian clan is not much stronger than the Qin clan. Although they were currently part of the Celestial Emperor's clan. However, it's possible that our disciples are not qualified to compete with them. Judging from the history, the Qin and the Xian clan were equally matched. Therefore, don't think that this Xian Wuji is unreachable. You must have the courage and determination to surpass him. Qin Yunran was carefree. He was not superstitious about the Heavenly Emperor Gate. After all, the previous Heavenly Emperor Gate was the Qin clan. Therefore, he did not speak these words out of arrogance, but with basis. Although Xian Wuji had exceptional talent, it was only because he was the son of the Heavenly Emperor that he received more fortune than ordinary disciples. Qin Chongyang agreed deeply as he also encouraged him. Wushuang, me, and the second chief think highly of you. If you keep growing at this speed, certainly you will leave behind the young people of this generation of the aspiring Throne Mountain Qin clan. Perhaps you will be the leader for the future of the Qin clan. Most likely, this Xian Wuji will be your lifelong enemy. From now on, you must treat Xian Wuji as an imaginary enemy and set him as a goal to strive for. Just as the second chief said, surpass him and defeat him. If the Qin clan wants to regain the Heavenly Emperor's seat, we must have someone to defeat Xian Wuji in the future. Inwardly, Qin Wushuang felt apprehensive as he nodded. Two chiefs, I will remember your teachings. However, I am undisciplined by nature. For now, I would not dare to promise you to lead the Qin clan. However, for the major matters of the Qin clan, I will exert all my efforts. Qin Wushuang had never been interested in leading a clan. Initially, when the Stargaze Palace wanted to nurture him to become a palace master, he had also refused. He was willing to fight for the sect and for his family. However, he was unwilling to be bound to the empty seat. His martial arts pursuit and life belief had destined him to advocate freedom and not be bound. Everyone had their own aspirations. Upon hearing the words of Qin Wushuang, Qin Yunran shared the same feeling. In fact, Qin Yunran was such a free and undisciplined person. Although he also cared about the matters of the Qin clan, Qin Chongyang was more responsible for the major and minor matters of the Qin clan. Although Qin Yunran was the second chief and held a higher position than Qin Chongyang, the third chief, he was more like an honorary chief. He had status and prestige, yet he rarely got involved in worldly affairs. Qin Chongyang understood the meaning of Qin Wushuang and did not force him. As long as it was to contribute to the Qin clan, regardless of the method, it would not be important. It might not be a bad thing for Qin Wushuang to want to be the driving force behind the scenes. Immediately, he nodded. Wushuang, in general, you have made a great contribution by killing Lei Jiao and Yin Zhiyang and thwarting the arrogance of the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect. Therefore, the wish that you made earlier can be considered. Of course, Qin Chongyang was referring to the great wish of Qin Yu's ancestor returning to the clan. Qin Wushuang said, "Third Chief, this matter is not urgent. Since this matter cannot be reported, there will be many opportunities in the future. Just in time, I was planning to take Su-Air back to the human countries." Qin Chongyang had already heard about this matter from Qin Yunran. Naturally, he would not object. "All right, we will mention the matter of Qin Yu returning to the Sacrificial Valley next time." Qin Chongyang instructed seriously. "This time, your return to the human countries will not be the same as before. The heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect hate you to the bone. Therefore, you must be careful along the way, and you must not expose your identity. Or else, most likely you will face the pursuit of Supreme Tao elite warriors. Perhaps, Xian Wuji has not set you as an imaginary enemy. However, after this lesson, the heavenly punishing villa and the Sound of Thunder sect will certainly list you as a dangerous figure. Certainly, they would not want to see an exceptional young man emerge from the Qin clan. Yes, Wushuang, this time when you return, you must keep a low profile. Of course, we will also keep a close watch. If the Supreme Tao elite warriors of these two houses are to leave the Heavenly Emperor Mountain, we will not remain indifferent." Clearly, Qin Yunran's words were meant to ease Qin Wushuang's mind. Of course, this was also the truth. Regardless of the Qin clan, the Heavenly Punishing Villa, or the Sound of Thunder sect, they all cared deeply about the whereabouts of the other party's Supreme Tao elite warriors. Qin Wushuang knew deeply about the power of the Supreme Tao elite warriors. Naturally, he would not let down his guard. A tall tree attracts the wind. Qin Wushuang's current reputation was enough to attract the wind. After Qin Yunran and Qin Chongyang had come to an agreement, Qin Wushuang did not bid farewell to the others. When they first arrived, besides being familiar with Elder Guanfeng, Qin Wushuang was only close to Guanxi, the person in charge of receiving them. Additionally, Qin Lan was a neighbor at the Ascending Dragon Slope and could be considered a nodding acquaintance. The others would only be clansmen of the plain Field Qin clan. Of course, there was no need for him to bid farewell. When they left through the secret passage, Qin Wushuang took Murong Su, Bao Bao, and loaned a step on the road back to the human countries. Qin Wushuang put the heart illusion mask on Murong Su for the time being. This way, Murong Su's temperament had changed drastically. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang used other masks to modify his appearance. This way, the group would not stand out, and they would not need to worry about being chased. Compared to the crisis on the way here, the way back appeared incredibly smooth. Of course, their mood was completely different. When they had arrived, there was a rain of blood and a foul wind and danger everywhere. When they returned, they had a beautiful woman by their side. The difference between the two could not be measured by reason. They traveled at a neither fast nor slow pace. On this day, they finally crossed thousands of mountains and rivers and arrived at the border of the Orderly Mountain Prefecture. Including Black Panther and Ying Long, these two puppets were extremely loyal and responsible. Qin Wushuang did not plan to move these two eyes. He arranged Ying Long to stay at the Orderly Mountain Prefecture and Black Panther to stay at the Judgment Mountain Prefecture as his long-term eyes. After passing the Orderly Mountain Prefecture, they would arrive at the border of the dispersed Praying Mountain. When Qin Wushuang was at the border area, he still heard people talking about how the heavenly Luo Daoist sect had invaded the human countries and how Qin Wushuang had taken revenge on the heavenly Luo Daoist sect by destroying their mountain gate. Up to now, it was still a hot topic of discussion. As for the recent events that had happened at the Heavenly Emperor Mountain, no one had spread it at this small border area. After all, when it involved the secrets of the Heavenly Emperor 8 Gates, certainly they would not hear about it at such a place. Before the news could leave the Heavenly Emperor 8 gates, it would be blocked. Qin Wushuang was not in the mood to listen to those gossips. Now, he only wanted to return to the human countries and see the extent of the destruction at the Stargaze Palace. At the same time, he also wanted to mourn those innocent fellow disciples. Although they were not killed by Qin Wushuang, in the end, they were related to Qin Wushuang. Even if the origin of this grudge was due to the conflict between the Stargaze Palace and the Nine Palace faction, it had caused Qin Wushuang and the heavenly Luo Daoist sect to become like fire and water. This had caused such an unexpected disaster. When they passed by the Monkey King Mountain, Bao Bao and Lone decided to return to take a look. They agreed to meet up at the Monkey King Mountain when Qin Wushuang had returned to the Xianyuan Mount. Bao Bao and Lone were also cunning. In fact, they did this to give Qin Wushuang and Murong Su some space. After passing the border of the dispersed praying mountain, they entered the human countries. Qin Wushuang felt as if he had been separated by a lifetime. The border of the dispersed praying mountain was adjacent to the Nine Raven Empire. First, these two rested for a night at the sky-breaking city. Then, they went to the imperial capital of the Nine Raven Empire, to Murong Su. These two places held beautiful memories. Thus, Murong Su had deep feelings for these two places. With their current cultivation, there was no one in the human kingdoms who could threaten their existence. Plus, since they had kept a low profile, of course, they would not cause any trouble. After staying for a day at the imperial capital of the Nine Raven Empire, they left the Nine Raven Empire and flew towards the Eastern Alliance. With their current speed, it would only take a day to travel these tens of thousands of miles. At dusk, Qin Wushuang had arrived at the Great Luo Empire. As he approached his hometown, Qin Wushuang could not help but feel conflicted inwardly. When he thought of the calamity at the Stargaze Palace, his heart became heavy. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 615. Before Qin Wushuang had reached the Stargaze Palace, a trace of sadness flashed across his heart. With his current strength, it was easy for him to feel the presence of the Stargaze Palace. Within this distance, he could not feel the flourishing presence of the Stargaze Palace. This way, most likely, the mountain gate of the Stargaze Palace had been destroyed to an extreme extent. Murong Su knew that this was the road to the Stargaze Palace. When he saw Qin Wushuang's sad expression, he knew his intentions. However, he did not know how to comfort him and only hugged his arm lightly. "Brother Qin, it's been a long time. Don't be too sad." Qin Wushuang gave a light sound of yes. However, his heart was throbbing with pain. The closer they got to the Stargaze Palace, the more familiar the grass and trees became. Scenes of the past kept surging in his heart. It made Qin Wushuang truly feel waves of sadness. Finally, the two arrived above the Stargaze Palace. Qin Wushuang looked down and only saw that the outer buildings of the Stargaze Palace had completely collapsed into ruins. Although the Five Elements Palace inside had also suffered heavy damage, the main building was still intact. Each day, Qin Wushuang had been worried about the Stargaze Palace. Now, he finally saw the true appearance of the Stargaze Palace. Although he saw a scene of devastation, inwardly he felt reassured. He landed on the desolate mountain road and walked up the stairs. The stone steps of this mountain road were also crooked and full of holes. Apparently, it had been deliberately destroyed. It could no longer be called a road, as there were ruins everywhere. Here was a giant hole. There was a pile of ruins like a small hill. With great difficulty, he arrived before the mountain gate. Those few giant pillars before the mountain gate had been blasted to the ground and broken into pieces. Before this mountain gate, it had evoked countless memories in Qin Wushuang. The first time he had followed his teacher Tan Zhongqi into the Stargaze Palace, it was Emissary Liu who had led the way. Before this mountain gate, Qin Wushuang had fought against the invasion of Zhao Heng, the deputy leader of the Nine Palace faction, together with his teacher Tan Zhongqi. It was as if everything had happened yesterday. As Murong Su looked at this devastated Stargaze Palace, she also felt uneasy. The heavenly Luo Daoist sect was truly too despicable. Murong Su felt that it was unfair that the Heavenly Emperor Gate did not pursue the responsibility of attacking the sects of the human countries. Brother Qin, since the Heavenly Luo Daoist sect is so cruel, sooner or later they will suffer the wrath of the heavens. Murong Su comforted him. Qin Wushuang laughed bitterly. Su are right. The human heart may be hidden, but the Heavenly Tao will not change. The Heavenly Monarch Gate can protect them, but the Heavenly Tao will not. Yes, Big Brother Qin, let's take a look inside. The two of them walked side by side towards the inside. Qin Wushuang spread out his spiritual perception and started to search the entire Stargaze Palace. What he didn't expect was that after this search, something unexpected really happened. Within the coverage of his spiritual perception, there were people hiding in groups of 2s and 3s in many corners of the Stargaze Palace ruins. However, the cultivation of these people was clearly much weaker than Qin Wushuang. Or else, Qin Wushuang would not have been able to find them. Qin Wushuang did not expose them as he walked side by side with Murong Su. Along the way, Murong Su could not help but feel somewhat curious. Brother Qin, you said that when the Heavenly Luo Daoist sect killed people, could it be that they also destroyed the bodies? How come we did not see a single body along the way? Qin Wushuang also felt somewhat confused. At this moment, he stopped before a pile of ruins. He said lightly, "Come out." Murong Su did not initiate his spiritual perception. Thus, for the time being, he did not know what Qin Wushuang meant. Immediately, he understood that people were hiding around the ruins. There were no movements and no one walked out. Qin Wushuang said lightly, "Behind the broken wall on the west side, inside the wild grass on the north side. 2 people come out." Since Qin Wushuang had exposed the other party's hiding place, the other party could not hide even if they wanted to. They could only come out from the dark. These 2 exchanged a glance. Although they were nervous, they did not show any fear. Although these 2 were upper sky elite warriors, they were only at the initial stage. Before Qin Wushuang, of course, this little bit of strength would not pose any threat. Qin Wushuang saw that they were dressed in ragged clothes and did not look like martial artists at all. Inwardly, he did not act recklessly and asked lightly, "You 2 are disciples of the Stargaze Palace? Humph, who are you? Do you want to interrogate us?" Qin Wushuang knew that more than these 2 people were hiding around the Stargaze Palace. Although he was almost certain that these 2 were disciples of the Stargaze Palace, he could not confirm the identities of the other people hiding around them. Thus, for the time being, he did not plan to expose his identity. Currently, he was wearing a mask and had changed his appearance. Naturally, no one would recognize him. Qin Wushuang knew that he could not get anything out of the other party when he saw their hostility. At the moment, he shook his head with a bitter smile and did not force them. He could not torture his fellow disciples, right? Immediately, he continued to search with his spiritual perception. Suddenly, Qin Wushuang's heart moved. Familiar presence, definitely familiar presence. He had discovered Tong Yin. No, there was also Simon Xing. This Tong Yin and Simon Xing were hiding in a corner near the 5 Elements Palace. This made Qin Wushuang feel a wave of joy. After the great calamity, it was apparent to see an old friend again. However, Qin Wushuang did not reveal his emotions. Like a gust of wind, he moved his body and floated away. Those 2 Stargaze disciples only felt a blur in front of their eyes, and the person before them had disappeared. They were already prepared to fight to the death, but they didn't expect that the other party would disappear like a ghost without even touching a single hair on their heads. When Murong Su saw Qin Wushuang leaving, he also floated inside without hesitation. Apparently, Simon Xing and Tong Yin, who were hiding in the corner, also noticed that an uninvited guest had entered the Stargaze Palace. Just as they were feeling nervous, suddenly, these 2 felt someone patting them lightly on their back. Next, before they had the time to turn around, They were dragged by a wave of power towards the Five Elements Palace. Qin Wushuang also summoned the Moon Palace Jade Hare and the Sky Pilfered Mole. In the human countries, it was enough to have these two spiritual beasts standing guard. They would not have to worry about other people invading. Dragged by Qin Wushuang, Simon Xing and Tong Yin could not resist at all. They only felt that their entire body was trapped by some kind of seal. They could not struggle at all and were scared out of their wits. After they entered the Five Elements Palace, the main building was not damaged much. Qin Wushuang brought these two back to the Green Cloud Palace. Inwardly, he felt gloomy as he looked at the mess inside the palace. After he put down the bodies of these two, Qin Wushuang walked to the main hall of the Green Cloud Palace. He swept away all the dust with his sleeve. Next to the incense burner, there were some incense sticks. Qin Wushuang twisted 3 sticks and made a seal with his hand. He let out a wave of fire and lit up the incense sticks in his hand. He bowed a few times in the main hall and put the incense sticks back into the incense burner. Simon Xing and Tong Yin looked at this person before them with astonishment. Their hearts were beating fast. Qin Wushuang's eyes were filled with sadness as he turned around. How many disciples are left in the Stargaze Palace? As soon as he said these words, the expression of these two changed as they looked at Qin Wushuang with disbelief. Marquis Wushuang? Simon Xing was the first to react. No one had called the name Marquis Wushuang for a long time. Qin Wushuang gave a light sigh and nodded. I didn't expect that after this farewell, things have changed. Tong Yin was surprised. Marquis Wushuang, is it really you? Initially, they had called Qin Wushuang brothers. However, after experiencing the great calamity, each of them had suffered a heavy blow. Plus, it had been too long since they had parted. To them, Qin Wushuang seemed unreachable. Thus, unconsciously, they had called him Marquis Wushuang, and their tone was filled with respect. It's me, just call me Wushuang. Qin Wushuang took off his mask. At this time, Murong Su also floated in. Brother Qin, are these two also your colleagues? Murong Su asked. Su'er, these two are my fellow countrymen and colleagues. We are much closer. Simon Xing and Tong Yin were somewhat uneasy, especially when they saw Murong Su had regained his celestial appearance. They appeared somewhat uneasy. Hello, my name is Murong Su. Murong Su was rather natural and unrestrained. The two of them nodded hesitantly and forced a smile. Wushuang, you are truly back. The rim of Tong Yan's eyes turned red as he said with a choked voice, in a Stargaze Palace, besides a few disciples that were not at the palace, the rest were all killed. They also destroyed the Stargaze Palace. Those people were too powerful. With a wave of their hand, they destroyed the entire building. Our people could not even get close to them. Qin Wushuang felt a heartache. The elite warriors sent by the heavenly Luo Daoist sect were all elite warriors at the Void Martial stage. How could the martial artists of the human countries like the Stargaze Palace resist them? Brother Tong, please continue. Tong Yin nodded and repeated the entire calamity. The tragic situation caused Qin Wushuang to feel waves of heartache. Did those people say anything? Qin Wushuang took a deep breath to calm his emotions. Then he asked, They said they did. But Tong Yin was somewhat embarrassed. Apparently, it was inconvenient for him to speak. It's all right. For sure it's related to me. Speak. I will listen. Tong Yin was surprised. Wushuang, you know everything? I know who did it. Qin Wushuang said with a calm tone. Yet, the fire of hatred burned uncontrollably in his eyes. Tong Yin nodded and said, Those people massacred here. They said that you had offended someone you could not afford to offend at the Xian Yuan Mound Forbidden Spiritual Zone and caused the destruction of the Stargaze Palace. They said that they would make you the center of the Stargaze Palace for all eternity. You would be reviled by the human countries and go down in infamy. When Murong Su heard up to this point, he could not help but say, This Luo Tong Tian is truly shameless. Not only did he use despicable methods, he also framed you, Brother Qin. Qin Wushuang waved his hand. Su-er, sooner or later, we will settle this debt with him. Let's not talk about the heavenly Luo Daoist sect for now. He turned to ask Tong Yin, now, how many disciples are left at the Stargaze Palace? All in all, there are less than 200 of them. Most of them have already left the great Luo Empire and sought refuge elsewhere. Only a few dozen of them are left to guard this place. A few dozen? Qin Wushuang said with a frown. How come I only found about 10? Tong Yin was shocked. Wushuang, you even know this? Qin Wushuang gave a long sigh. Do you guys think you hid well? Tong Yin scratched his head. A few dozen of us were divided into 6 groups. We took turns to guard this place, to prevent the enemies from coming and getting caught in one net. The others are hiding in the virtuous Cloud Mountain Range. After all, there were still a few dozen of them. Although Qin Wushuang felt sad, he felt somewhat gratified. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please go to www.chidian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 616. Qin Wushuang also knew that along the way, there were bloodstains everywhere. However, there were no corpses. These survivors must have buried them. Indeed, after he asked, Tong Yin confirmed his guess. Although Tong Yin and Simon Xing were not as nervous as before, they still answered every question that Qin Wushuang asked. The atmosphere was somewhat depressing. By the way, Tong, are those old friends from the Bayou country doing well? Tong Yin gave a long sigh. Those few from the He family are no longer here. In this disaster, Wan Jinpeng also died. Brother Shimin and I are also lucky. We were training in the mountain and did not get chased. My sister was taken by your teacher to the endless Eastern Sea. Endless Eastern Sea? Morong Su was slightly surprised. Qin Wushuang nodded. This was a fortune amidst the misfortune. Including the higher-ups and core disciples of the Stargaze Palace and his family. They had all entered the endless Eastern Sea. Or else, this disaster would have been beyond redemption. While they were talking, suddenly, 3 sharp whistles came from the outside. Tong Yin and Simon Xing's expression changed. Again, Qin Wushuang was stunned. Who? Who else could it be besides those bastards from the Dragon and Tiger sect? When Tong Yin said here, he also gritted his teeth. Dragon and Tiger sect? Qin Wushuang almost forgot about their existence. Initially, this Dragon and Tiger sect, along with the Stargaze and the Archaic Mysteries sect, were the 3 giants in the eastern part of the human countries. Later, due to the destruction of the Archaic Mysteries sect, the Dragon and Tiger sect was intimidated and surrendered to the Stargaze Palace. They accepted the Eastern Alliance and recognized the Stargaze as the Eastern Overlord. Could it be that this Dragon and Tiger sect dared to cause trouble? Or could it be that they were adding insult to injury and wanted to seize the Eastern Overlord position when they saw the Stargaze Palace in trouble? Wushuang, you came back at the right time. In recent years, the Dragon and Tiger sect has sent many elite warriors to threaten the Stargaze Palace to hand over the 3 spiritual keys to the endless Eastern Sea. They also killed a few disciples of the Stargaze Palace. Killed people. Qin Wushuang's expression changed. Haven't Dragon Tiger sect heard that a starving camel is still bigger than a horse? Even if the Stargaze Palace is in some temporary crisis, could it be that the Dragon and Tiger sect thinks they can smash the Stargaze Palace to death with a hammer? Wushuang, you don't know. Now, the human countries are spreading the rumor that you were killed by the powerful powerhouses of the Xian Yuan Mound. They said that our higher-ups had already abandoned the Stargaze Palace and escaped. Thus, the human countries all feel that the Stargaze Palace is finished. They are preparing to strip the Great Luo of its upper-ranking empire status. When Tong Yin said here, his tone was filled with humiliation. Even those subordinate countries of the Great Luo Empire are eager to make a move. Without the deterrence of the Stargaze Palace, they all plan to surrender to the Dragon and Tiger sect. Simon Xing said indignantly, they're really fence-sitters. In times of crisis, instead of thinking of contributing to the country, all you want is to surrender. Qin Wushuang did not find it strange. If the Stargaze Palace had truly fallen, the Great Luo Empire would not have a future. For sure, the entire Eastern situation would be controlled by the Dragon and Tiger sect. It was because the archaic Mysteries sect had already been destroyed among the original 3 middle-ranking empires in the East. The Stargaze Palace had suffered a great loss, and their sect had been destroyed. To outsiders, it was no different than being destroyed. Thus, naturally, only the Dragon and Tiger sect could shoulder the responsibility of the Eastern situation. Let's go out and take a look. Qin Wushuang would like to see how much progress this Dragon and Tiger sect had made. They had dared to hit a person when they were down and slaughter the disciples of the Stargaze Palace in public. Although Simon Xing and Tong Yin did not know Qin Wushuang's current strength, they knew that Qin Wushuang was invincible in the human countries. Or else, how could he deal with those super elite warriors of the Xianyuan Mount? When they saw Qin Wushuang had returned, they could not but help but feel some hope in their heart of despair. At least, they would no longer be threatened by the Dragon and Tiger sect and would not worry about their invasion. Currently, the Stargaze Palace could not bear another impact. Besides Tong Yin and Simon Xing, the other 8 Stargaze disciples who had been hiding in the dark had already rushed to the mountain gate. Qin Wushuang walked out from the back with Tong Yin and Simon Xing. Before the mountain gate, a group of martial artists from the Dragon and Tiger sect were pointing and gesticulating aggressively. The leader among them was the second Tiger honored warrior of the Dragon and Tiger sect. This person was still at the advanced stage. Compared to a few years ago, he had not broken through. On the contrary, the 2 core disciples next to him, Wei Shenglong and Huang Qinghu, had advanced rapidly. They had also entered the advanced stage. This progress made Qin Wushuang feel somewhat surprised. Although Wei Shenglong and Huang Qinghu were the 2 strongest disciples of the Dragon and Tiger sect, they had both entered the advanced stage in a few short years. Such progress was still shocking in the human countries. For your information, when Qin Wushuang had entered the Stargaze Palace, the 5 palace masters were only at the advanced stage. Thus, Qin Wushuang was certain that Wei Shenglong and Huang Qinghu must have acquired some fortuitous opportunities. Or else, they would not have had such rapid progress. That second Tiger honored warrior shot a few glances at the remaining disciples of the Stargaze Palace and said with a cold sneer, "What are you doing here with trash like you?" One of the disciples that Qin Wushuang had pulled out from the dark earlier said loudly, "Tiger honored warrior Xia. After all, you're an honored warrior of the Dragon and Tiger sect. Could it be that you don't care about the relationship between the Stargaze Palace and the Dragon and Tiger sect? Are you not afraid of the 5 palace masters coming back to settle accounts with you?" That second Tiger honored warrior laughed madly. "Coming back? I was just about to ask you, where did the 5 palace masters led by Zhuo Buchuan run off to? Come back, stop dreaming. You will not come back. Since you have offended the major powerhouses of the forbidden spiritual zones, your Stargaze Palace is destined to be destroyed, just like how you destroyed the archaic Mysteries sect." That disciple flew into a rage. "Xia, don't be so arrogant. Since you mentioned the archaic Mysteries sect, you better think about it. Who was it that destroyed the archaic Mysteries sect? Since senior brother Qin Wushuang can destroy the archaic Mysteries sect, it would be as easy as flipping his hand to destroy the Dragon and Tiger sect." "Qin Wushuang? Haha, Qin Wushuang?" That tiger-honored warrior Xia laughed even more recklessly. "Qin Wushuang is being chased by the powerhouses of the forbidden spiritual zones. I am afraid that not even his bones remain. You are not counting on him to come back and reorganize the Stargaze Palace, right?" The Dragon and Tiger sect had also calculated it. With the super major powerhouses of the forbidden spiritual zones, it would be incredibly easy to destroy the Stargaze Palace. Although Qin Wushuang was devilish and invincible in the human countries, he was nothing in the Xianyuan Mount. If he had offended a super major powerhouse, they could kill him 10 or 100 times with a single finger. Therefore, this time, the Dragon and Tiger sect had nothing to fear. They had endured for more than a year to wait for the Stargaze Palace's reaction. They saw that the higher-ups of the Stargaze Palace had not shown themselves, and there was no news from Qin Wuxuan. They guessed that most likely the higher-ups of the Stargaze Palace had been killed by people of the forbidden spiritual zones. And Qin Wuxuan had been killed a long time ago. Therefore, in these recent months, the Dragon and Tiger sect had become even more active. They had sent their disciples to provoke and kill the remaining disciples of the Stargaze Palace a few times. In fact, they were throwing stones to test the waters. If the Stargaze Palace still had trump cards, it would be impossible for them to watch their disciples get killed without doing anything. After a few probing attempts, the Stargaze Palace did not show any reaction. This had also encouraged their arrogance. It had allowed them to firmly believe that the Stargaze Palace could not cause any more trouble. Therefore, this time, Tiger-honored warrior Xia had stepped out personally. He had brought the two most exceptional core disciples of the Dragon and Tiger sect and a group of disciples to the Stargaze Palace. Initially, he had planned to kill all the remaining members of the Stargaze Palace. Then, he would destroy the Stargaze Palace in one fell swoop, overthrow the great Luo Empire, and seize the authority of the Eastern region. Once again, he would unite the Eastern region and become the Eastern Overlord. The most important matter was to seize the 3 spiritual keys of the endless Eastern Sea. In fact, those disciples of the Stargaze Palace knew that the 5 palace masters had gone to the endless Eastern Sea. However, they could not speak these words to the Dragon and Tiger sect. Therefore, they could only feel anxious. Tiger-honored warrior Xia's expression turned cold. You guys listen well. Whoever knows the spiritual keys of the endless Eastern Sea, as long as you can provide the clues, you will be spared from death. You can even join the Dragon and Tiger sect and become a member of the sect. If you persist in going about things the wrong way and refuse to report what you know, then don't blame me for being impolite. As soon as he had finished speaking, those disciples of the Stargaze Palace swore, Xia, don't be shameless. Although the Stargaze Palace is in dire straits, we are still tough. Are you threatening us? Just give up on that idea. That's right, if you want to kill us, it's up to you. However, don't forget, for those sins you have committed to the Stargaze Palace, one day, the Stargaze Palace will make you pay back double. Tiger-honored warrior Xia sneered. For these so-called karma and retribution, he simply snorted disdainfully. He only believed in the current situation and believed that this was the chance for the Dragon and Tiger sect to rise. Shenglong, Qinghu, I will leave these pieces of trash to you. Don't leave anyone alive. Kill them all. Tiger-honored warrior Xia gave the order coldly. Without hesitation, Wei Shenglong and Huang Qinghu stepped out of the ranks and rushed over like tigers and wolves pouncing on sheep. That disciple of the Stargaze Palace said loudly, Everyone stay close. Let's fight it out with them. Kill as many as you can. Wei Shenglong and Huang Qinghu revealed an evil grin. Just these few guys wanted to fight with their lives on the line? Wei Shenglong waved his hand, and a burst of sword light slashed out. With a flash in the sky, instantly it transformed into waves of cold lights that shot towards those 8 people like a rain of flowers. Huang Qinghu roared with laughter. Senior brother Wei, with your move, I don't even need to move. Just when Wei Shenglong was about to laugh proudly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Before he could reveal a smile, suddenly, he frowned and his expression turned cold. Then, something unexpected happened. They only saw a burst of invisible power in the sky that seemed to have grabbed and congealed into a whirlpool in the sky. It sucked in all those scattered sword lights. As soon as that whirlpool stirred, it swallowed all these sword flowers. Like a stone sinking into the sea, there was not the slightest reaction. Who is it? Wei Shenglong turned pale with fright. This kind of divine ability completely exceeded the scope of his imagination. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.chidian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 617. Not to mention Wei Shenglong. Even the experienced and knowledgeable tiger-honored warrior Xia was stunned by the unbelievable scene before him. He had never seen such divine skills before. He didn't even see who made the move. When he looked around, it was empty. Regardless of how he spread his spiritual perception to search, there was no one else besides the Stargaze Palace disciples before him. Tiger-honored warrior Xia's hair stood on end as cold sweat emerged from his back. Vividly, he realized that today's situation was not good. Wei Shenlong was a smart person. When this attack failed, he knew that something was wrong. He held back his momentum and did not attack a second time. Instead, he took 2 steps back and defended himself. Huang Qinghu did not know that Wei Shenlong had hit a snag. He was not as smart as Wei Shenlong. When he saw Wei Shenlong stop attacking, he could not help but ask, "Senior brother Wei, why did you stop?" "Don't speak, retreat." Wei Shenlong pulled Huang Qinghu and retreated. However, the Stargaze Palace disciples looked at each other in dismay. They did not know what had happened. "Xia Tianming, I haven't seen you in a few years. You've become much more daring." An indifferent voice sounded in the sky. When tiger-honored warrior Xia heard someone call out his name directly, he felt a chill in his heart. Why did this voice sound so familiar? Thinking again, tiger-honored warrior Xia's entire body quivered. He could not help but tremble as his expression changed drastically. Suddenly, he remembered a person. An extremely terrifying name emerged in his mind instantly. Qin Wushuang. Tiger-honored warrior Xia turned pale with fright as he looked around. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost. When Wei Shenlong and Huang Qinghu saw tiger-honored warrior Xia's expression, they knew that something was wrong. They immediately scuttled to tiger-honored warrior Xia's side and asked softly, "Second tiger-honored warrior, who is it? Who is it? Can't you hear it?" Tiger-honored warrior Xia's voice was trembling. Wei Shenlong and Huang Qinghu looked at each other. They also felt that this voice was familiar. Suddenly, as if they had realized something, they shouted almost at the same time, "Qin Wushuang." As soon as they shouted this name, the faces of these two also turned ashen. The lights that shot out from their eyes were full of fear. Even though they were the chosen ones of the Dragon and Tiger sect, and had recently received a rare fortuitous opportunity to advance to the advanced stage, they were still in a daze. However, the name Qin Wushuang was already a monumental existence to the human nations. It was a height that they could not surpass. Not to mention the violent reaction of the people of the Dragon and Tiger sect. Even those disciples of the Stargaze Palace were extremely shocked. Qin Wushuang? What kind of joke was this? In the void, a figure appeared out of thin air. It turned from illusory to corporeal, as if it had appeared out of thin air. Qin Wushuang didn't want to talk nonsense with Tiger Venerable Xia at all. He looked at Tiger Venerable Xia coldly and said, "Xia Tianming, you're not completely muddle-headed yet. Why? Do you look like you're here to add insult to injury?" Tiger Venerable Xia stammered, "Qin Wushuang, please don't misunderstand. Today, we came to investigate the situation, to observe the Stargaze Palace, and to see where the Eastern situation is going. This." In the end, even he felt that these words were not righteous enough. Qin Wushuang listened with a cold sneer and waved his hand. "I don't want to listen to your nonsense. I heard that your Dragon and Tiger sect killed many of my disciples. Is this true?" That must be a misunderstanding." Cold sweat emerged from Tiger Venerable Xia's forehead. "A misunderstanding?" Qin Wushuang's eyes turned cold as he asked coldly. "Then a moment ago, who was making a ruckus here? Isn't that you, Tiger Venerable Xia?" Tiger Venerable Xia even had the heart to die. At this moment, he could not care about his face and self-esteem. If he did not deal with this properly, most likely it would result in a complete annihilation. With Qin Wushuang's divine skills, it would be as easy as flipping his hand to kill them. Immediately, he smiled apologetically and said, "It's me, Xia Tianming, who is not sensible and wanted to pretend before these juniors. In fact, stop talking nonsense, Xia Tianming. It's as easy as killing a dog for me to kill you. Today, I will not kill you, and I am not afraid to let you go. However, you must remember that in a month, everyone from the Dragon and Tiger sect will gather before the mountain gate of the Stargaze Palace. You will kneel 3 times and cow down 9 times until you reach my mountain gate. By that time, it's another matter whether the 5 palace masters will forgive you or not. Don't forget, regardless of who you are, you must hand over the murderer that killed my disciples. Or else, what happened to the archaic mysteries sect yesterday will be the tomorrow of the Dragon and Tiger sect. Tiger Venerable Xia's entire body twitched, and extreme fear emerged from his eyes. He knew that Qin Wushuang was not speaking alarmist words to scare them. He had heard of Qin Wushuang's methods and had seen it before. Regardless of dealing with the Great Wu or the archaic mysteries sect, he was ruthless. At this moment, they did not have the chance to defend themselves. They kept nodding and leading a group of disciples of the Dragon and Tiger sect. They ran away like rats covering their heads. Tong Yin and Simon Xing walked up. When they saw people of the Dragon and Tiger sect leaving safely, they were more or less confused. Do you want to ask? Why did you let them go? Tong Yin and Simon Xing forced a smile and did not speak. Qin Wushuang gave a long sigh. Now, I have entered the Heavenly Emperor Qin clan and belong to the Xian Yuan Mount. I cannot interfere with the conflicts of the human countries easily, or else I will certainly be criticized. If I were alone, it would not matter. I am afraid that the enemies of the Qin clan will use this excuse to attack the Qin clan. Anyways, this Dragon and Tiger sect will not amount to much. In the future, the 5 palace masters will settle accounts with them. Now, Tong Yin and Simon Xing had realized the light. The other 8 disciples also rushed up and surrounded Qin Wushuang. Clearly, they wanted to see the graceful bearing of senior brother Qin Wushuang. Qin Wushuang said to Tong Yin and Simon Xing, "Go and gather all disciples to the Stargaze Palace. There's no need to hide anymore." Both Tong Yin and Simon Xing were extremely excited. The return of Qin Wushuang meant that the backbone of the Stargaze Palace had been established. The backbone of the Stargaze Palace had been established. It made them feel extremely excited. Soon, those disciples that had been hiding at the Virtuous Cloud Summit had all returned to the Stargaze Palace. Naturally, the mood of these disciples was the same as Tong Yin and the others. They were all abnormally excited. Initially, they had slowly lost all hope and felt that the revival of the Stargaze Palace was impossible. They were already prepared to die for the Stargaze Palace. Now, when they saw Qin Wushuang had returned, they knew that their savior had returned. How could they not be overjoyed? Tong Yin said loudly, "Everyone, that evil powerhouse of the forbidden spiritual zones is called the Heavenly Luo Taoist sect. They're trying to sow discord and said that they had made a vicious move against the Stargaze Palace because of senior brother Qin Wushuang. Everyone, do not fall into their vicious trap. That Heavenly Luo Taoist sect is the supporter of the 9 Palace faction. They made a move against the Stargaze Palace because of the 9 Palace faction. It's definitely not a personal grudge with senior brother Qin Wushuang. Besides, the conflict in the forbidden spiritual zones should not have involved the human countries. Since the Heavenly Luo Taoist sect has gone against the tide, sooner or later they will receive the wrath of the heavens." In fact, Tong Yin had spoken these words to eliminate the misunderstanding. Fortunately, the disciples of the Stargaze Palace were not brainless people. They all knew that Tong Yin was speaking the truth. All of them said, "Senior brother Qin, please don't blame yourself. The disciples of the Stargaze Palace advance and retreat together. We will never blame you because of the provocation of outsiders. Yes, everyone has seen senior brother Qin's contribution to the Stargaze Palace. Whoever blames senior brother Qin would be the true ungrateful person." These disciples of the Stargaze Palace were as quiet as a deity when they heard Qin Wushuang. Especially when they heard their friend say that a moment ago, Qin Wushuang had berated Tiger-honored warrior Xia of the Dragon and Tiger sect as if he was scolding his own son. When the other party had left with his tail between his legs, they felt incredibly excited. In recent years, these remaining disciples of the Stargaze Palace had also been forced to suffer by the Dragon and Tiger sect. They had always been attacked and chased by the dragon and tiger sect. Now, hearing that the dragon and tiger sect had returned with a loss, of course they felt extremely carefree. Qin Wushuang gathered with these disciples for a while and said, "Everyone, I still have some urgent matters to take care of. These matters are related to the future of the Stargaze Palace. I will excuse myself for now. Everyone will stay at the Stargaze Palace, and no need to hide. If the dragon and tiger sect comes to make trouble, they will die for sure." Qin Wushuang left behind 5 sealed spiritual beasts. They were the 3 one-horn mystical horse, hissing sky phoenix, and pure altar precious pig at the profound void martial stage. He also left behind 2 sky pilfered mole and moon palace jade hare at the transformation void martial stage. These 5 spiritual beasts were the main force that Qin Wushuang had used to attack those freelance martial artists at the dispersed praying mountain. With them overseeing the Stargaze Palace, even if the strongest powerhouse of the human countries were to invade, they would not be able to return. On the other hand, Qin Wushuang and Murong Su had arrived at the imperial capital of the Great Luo Empire. Although the imperial capital was as prosperous as before, it was clear that due to the attack from the Stargaze Palace, the entire Great Luo Empire was not in a good state. This point was also apparent in the imperial capital. It was as if everyone had realized that the glory of the Great Luo Empire would become the afterglow of the setting sun. The glorious time was not far away. Like a shooting star, this new upper-ranking empire would disappear in a flash. Thus, the atmosphere in the imperial capital was also depressing. From the royal family to the commoners, everyone was filled with a feeling of the end of the world. One could not see any signs of vitality on each person's face. Qin Wushuang brought Murong Su to a little alley. Qin Wushuang looked at the bluestone floor that extended to the depth of the alley and whispered, "It should be here, right?" Murong Su asked curiously, "Brother Qin, are you meeting someone here?" Qin Wushuang nodded, then shook his head. "You can say that. If the person is here, I can meet him. If he is not here, I can just take out the things." While they were talking, they had already arrived at a yard deep inside the alley. When they pushed open the door, it was a yard that was neither big nor small. Some melons and fruits were planted in the yard. Outside the yard, there was a well that was surrounded by a green fence. "Is Senior Hu home?" As soon as Qin Wushuang had finished asking, a trembling old man walked out of the house. With a walking stick in his hand, he asked with a hoarse voice, "Young man, who are you looking for?" Qin Wushuang said, "A sky full of stars." That old man was stunned. "A game of chess under my feet." Qin Wushuang continued, "Pick the stars to be chess pieces." That old man also said, "Invite the sun and the moon to play a game." After these two had finished speaking, they both laughed. That old man had swept away his previous attitude. With a face full of experience, he sized up Qin Wushuang with a lightning-like gaze. To be continued. If you want to know the future, please log on to www.chijian.com. Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.